Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптя посорбати довбані щі, та трохи в ущах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Зі сходу припхались до нас барани, для восстановлення великої страни, найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи, всяке озброєння, різне, ракети, потужні машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, і ми зачаїли на орків образу, з бандитів російських робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, на вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто ж винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає їх цар.
Take cover, hit the like.
Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, everybody, and welcome to day 106 of the news.
And tonight we're of course going to be reporting on day 106 of the news, which begins a brand new week in this war. Of course, we don't measure the weeks off of the Mondays or the Sundays. We measure the weeks by how many 7-day intervals have gone by since February 24th. So let me actually do the math here real quick, because I'm going to be honest with all of y'all, I've lost track of the weeks. So let me divide 106 by 7. We are now on the 15th week of the war, and this is going to start off the news for the remainder of this week until the next Monday. So, without further ado, let's get straight into the schedule. Starting off, we're actually going to be beginning inside of Russia. We're going to cover the 2 bits of news we've gotten inside of Russia. We've also seen evidence of sabotage today, which has been incredibly interesting. We will touch on that a little bit. Then we'll be moving down into Ukraine, and we'll be covering all of our location unknowns, which is a huge segment tonight of 15 markers of news. We also got news today, like the thumbnail says, that the Wagner group was hit. Their headquarters was destroyed by a Ukrainian attack today, and it was seen on film burning. We'll be covering that in the location unknown segment, although later on we were able to confirm exactly where it was, and we will go to that part of the country and show where that football field is. After we cover the location unknowns, we're then going to start moving towards the Kharkiv area and also the northern Donbass. But before we do, we're going to take 3 questions from the chat. Once we answer those, we're going to move on to the Kharkiv area and also the northern Donbass. Then, while we're moving in between Svetlodar and Orlivka, which is kind of our transition segment in between the northern Donbass and the southern Donbass, we're once again going to pause and take 3 questions from the chat. After that, we'll then continue on our southern Donbass news, our southern front news, the news from around the rest of the country, and then we'll finally address the speech from President Zelensky that came out today. So, we have a lot of stuff ahead of us, and also, I look forward to reporting it as well. So, without further ado, let's get straight into it. Starting off in Russia with probably the best news that we've seen coming out of Russia in a while, we've seen that Russian saboteurs have apparently hit their mark and caused a sizable fire. Here we can see that a fire broke out in an optical factory today, and we can see that the black smoke is billowing out of the storage building. You don't need optics to see that fire. Now, to get a little bit more information about this, apparently this is a Zagorsk optical mechanical plant, where, of course, military optics are produced. I actually pulled up this company and looked at them a little bit in detail, and from what I could collect, it appears that they produce all kinds of optics, from tank optics to rifle optics. And so, hopefully, this has caused a severe amount of damage to the very small number of optics they already had on the front lines, at least for their small arms, and we may see those diminishing even further after this attack, considering that this is one of the major factories in Russia that does produce these optics. Now, what's really interesting about this is usually we see sabotage attacks are conducted on the outskirts of Moscow, really in kind of like what I would call the suburbs. We saw that in Zhukovsky. Let me try and see where Zhukovsky is. So we're going a little bit too far down. We've reached Tula. There is Zhukovsky. Yeah, I'm correct in saying that. This is where another plant was burning a little while ago that did a lot of missile development. And now we can see on the northern end, in a town that's right on the outskirts of Moscow, I guess you could say, we can now see another factory burning. We've seen a lot of sabotage attacks, it seems, occurring in the Moscow area directly, and also a couple of areas around the country that are not within, I guess, the greater Moscow area. But we continue to see sabotage attacks around Moscow, and so you know that this must be freaking out the Russian government to some extent while they're not making it public. It's very alarming that out of everywhere in the country, the highest amount of sabotage attacks are occurring right outside of Moscow in the perimeter, I guess you could say, of the ring roads. And so, of course, interesting to see, and it's very good to know that there are Russians, apparently, and Belarusians, and maybe even some Ukrainians that are inside of Russia that are traveling around like a roving band of tourists and then committing, of course, attacks on military infrastructure. So great to see, and I hope that they do continue to keep this up. We don't know what kind of effect this is actually going to have on the front lines. Optics for small arms are not necessary. Of course, they're very nice to have, but soldiers can operate with iron sights alone. So we'll just have to see what kind of effect this has on the front. But I feel, being honest, it's going to be negligible. But it's still good to see that a sabotage attack did occur and it was successful. We're now going to be moving on into Moscow itself, where we've heard some very interesting news. And I'm going to explain this before we get into it. According to this video here and the translation in it, which of course I will have to read out because it's that certain format where the translation is cut off at the bottom of the screen, apparently Russian troops have been invited to Nicaragua. For some of those who do not know where Nicaragua is, Nicaragua, geez, I couldn't get that out, is sandwiched in between Honduras and Costa Rica. And so it appears that this is a little bit concerning. This is, of course, in Central America. It's a couple of countries south of Mexico, but not by a long shot, and it's in the general same area that the Soviet Union used to try and exert influence over. In fact, the Soviets tried to exert influence over everything from Chile to, hell, I mean, like Guatemala. So, well, really Cuba. I guess that's the closest you could get to the United States. So it's concerning, I would say, as the least. Of course, they're not going to go over to Nicaragua and most likely overthrow the country. It's going to be some kind of a cooperative friendship thing where they have a war game or some kind of military exercise or whatnot. But this is something that I consider to be alarming. I guess you could say, and something I believe that America should step in and intervene on and say that Nicaragua cannot have Russian troops inside of their country. Of course, some people may be saying they have the right to do that, but on the other hand, this is a political game in between the Russians and the Americans, and in the end, the Americans must ensure that the North American continent at least stays within American control. And so I would start levying political pressure on the Nicaraguans to ensure that nothing of the sort happens. But I'm going to take y'all to the video now and let y'all see it for yourselves. I'm also going to have to read off the translation at the bottom, so here's the video. Oh, man, hang on. It's apparently on Twitter. Let me go hop over to Twitter real quick. All right, so let me hop on here, mute that. The most unpleasant cherry atop the Democratic cake for the United States was the sensational announcement by Daniel Ortega. Wait a minute, hang on. Let me go back to that part. Daniel Ortega, president of Nicaragua. He permitted Russian troops, ships and planes to enter Nicaragua. Of course, only for humanitarian purposes. Russian troops can enter Nicaragua in the second part of 2022. What did you want? If American missile systems can nearly reach Moscow from Ukrainian territory, it's time for Russia to roll out something powerful, closer to the American city upon a hill. Then now it's repeating. But as you can see right there, it was a sarcastic thing to say it's humanitarian, and they were pretty much saying, oh, look, we're going to start setting up arms and equipment inside of Nicaragua. And this is something that I feel like, not getting political or anything, but Eisenhower kind of had the right idea. While he was doing it for banana companies, I feel like we ought to be doing this in, I guess you could say, the assurance of stability here in North America. Everyone, if you're old enough, can remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was the closest we ever came to nuclear war with the Russians and the closest that Russian nuclear weapons ever got to the United States. But Nicaragua is not that far away. It's just a couple of hundred more miles further down the Caribbean Sea. And I consider the North American continent, while of course there's multiple countries on it and they're all sovereign in their own right, it's really America's continent, I guess you could say. The entire continent has to fall under the United States sphere of influence at all times, because if not, it could, of course, destabilize. So I believe that political pressure should be levied upon the nation of Nicaragua to ensure that these Russian troops are not allowed to enter, and if they're still allowed to enter, there may be need, and this, of course, sounds a little bit warmongering, but of course these are precarious times, there may be need to actually intervene militarily in Nicaragua and perhaps ensure that Russian soldiers will not be on the North American continent in any regard. But with that, you can see, once again, that the Russians, while incredibly weak, and we know that if there ever was a conventional war, we'd be able to steamroll them, there's no question of that, we can clearly see that they're still trying to, I guess you could say, leverage the United States and try and threaten them in some way. And to that, I would say we should flat out ensure that there's never a possibility of that. So with that, of course, interesting news there. That's not the main news of the night. Of course, we focus more on Ukraine than the international bits of news, but still interesting and a little bit concerning nonetheless. With that, we're now going to be moving down into the location unknowns, which we do have a sizable amount of tonight. And we're going to start off with the first one. Here in this first clip, we can see the Ukrainians hitting Russian positions with a drone dropping bomblets. This was actually showed in the short clip today, and here you can see that the drone drops the bomb. Any second now, it'll drop the bomblet. And the bomblet is on its way, and this thing appears to be improvised. It looks like it may have been 3D printed. You can see that the tail fins have multiple colors. One's green, one's white, one's blue. It generally looks like an improvised explosive. But I got to give the Ukrainians credit that they find a way to make these things accurate enough that they can look straight down on that trench, and somehow this little bomblet will pretty much glide its way down into that trench and explode. So very good to see that. And we can see that the bomblet, of course, is on its way. There's a Russian soldier right there, and it looks like he didn't have a fun time, to say the least. Another thing that's interesting about this video is that when you look before the bomblet explodes, and this is something that I've emphasized time and time again, is that trenches cannot be in straight or nearly straight lines. If you look at this trench is largely in a straight line until this one small little break right here. If a bomb hits here, where this bomb did hit, the shrapnel is going to travel down the length of the trench in that direction, and it's going to travel down nearly the entirety of the length in this direction towards other Russians. I don't know what's wrong with the Russians. I don't know why they never learned how to dig a trench properly, but you're always supposed to make sure that there's breaks and sharp turns in trenches, so that way if a bomblet or a bomb or an artillery shell or anything like that falls within a trench, the shrapnel will be contained in a very small area and kill the smallest amount of people. Of course, I don't want to give the Russians too many ideas because this does make it easier for the Ukrainians to wipe them out, but you can see that when this bomblet explodes, what I said is largely true. You can see that the plume of smoke, of course, didn't go out the walls of the trench. It traveled down the length of it, which is also the direction the shrapnel is heading in. So the shrapnel, of course, just traveled down the length of the trench in both directions. Shrapnel bounces off the walls of the trenches and travels a little bit further, but not too far beyond the bins. And we can see that it got at least one Russian. We don't know of any others. We can see maybe one other here, where my mouse cursor is circling, that may have been wounded from the shrapnel that, of course, flew down the trench because there's not enough breaks in it. And so I would guess you could say that, maybe that's the same guy. I think he may have been flung a distance. I can't really tell. We know that at least one of them was heavily wounded or killed, and we can see the drone that did the job. It looks like a DJI Mavic of some kind. Of course, I'm not a huge... I guess you could say geek on drones. Sadly, I don't know much about them. I do have one of these, though. But they seem to be pretty effective, and the Ukrainians are using them fairly well. And so, of course, huge kudos to the Ukrainians who continue to manage to pull off miracles like this time and time again with these small drones and the bomblets that they're pretty much making out of 3D printed materials and some explosives. And so with that, we're now going to move on to our next bit of Location Unknown news. Here we can see that the Russians used a Kub. Apparently a Kub is some kind of a loitering bomb, and they dropped it from an aircraft or a helicopter. And we can see right here, the red highlighted area. Now, this is something else I want to point out before we actually continue on explaining what the Kub is and what it did. Isn't it kind of odd that this drone footage is incredibly blurry, and it looks like it was deliberately made blurry until later on in the video after the bomb exploded, and then they show you what went on down there. I feel like this is a deliberate attempt to try and sway the information and make it look like a successful bombing attack. Because considering that, of course, it's blurred out at the beginning, it always throws up the questions, is this actually true? And the answer is, if it's coming from the Russians, most likely not. Our experience has shown that a lot of the stuff they put out is largely untrue, and you can't really verify it. But when you see the Kubs flying down to these supposed Ukrainian positions, and you can see, right when it explodes, they then unblur the footage. Right at that instance, watch it unblur. It explodes, and you can't even see what kind of Ukrainian forces were there, or what they hit. We can see a little bit of a cluster of stuff. We can't even tell if those are people. And so this whole entire video is questionable to me, but we did see the Russians using a new kind of weapon system, which is why I showed the video, which is a Kub loitering munition. I believe it's just a Kub bomb. Let's pull that up. Here's the Kub. No, that's not the Kub we're looking for. Let's see here. Let me try and see if I can find some information about a air-to-ground version of the... Hell, it may not even have been a Kub. Maybe it was something else, and this caption was misidentified. Regardless, we did see some kind of a guided bomb fly towards the ground and explode, but we're not really sure if it actually took out Ukrainians, considering that they blurred out the first part of the footage that would have shown the Ukrainians clearly there if they were. So with that, we're now going to be moving on to our next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a low-flying Ukrainian helicopter. Now, I really do wish that this time I could play the music. It is copyrighted. It's very copyrighted. I can promise y'all that. If y'all would like to hear this music, make sure to click on the link in the description below to the Day 106 map and go to this marker on the map, click on it, and you can hear the music for yourselves. It's Fortunate Son, I'll say that. And so this helicopter is flying with Fortunate Son playing, and it's really cool. But anyways, here's the video of this helicopter, a Ukrainian one, flying low across the ground in an unknown location. We can see all the soldiers inside of it. It is an Mi-8 helicopter, which has been heavily used by the Ukrainians since the outset of the war. And we can see all the soldiers inside, looking like they're in generally good spirits. And we can see that the guy filming apparently is the door gunner on one side of this Mi-8. and we can see that they are flying incredibly low. I'm sure that feels really cool to do, to fly in a helicopter that low to the ground. It's almost something straight out of a video game. So I bet they're having a pretty fun time with this. Of course, they look like they're in good morale, and a very cool video for us to watch. So with that, that's the end of the video, but of course, a very cool perspective on Ukrainian airborne soldiers, if you want to call them airborne, being transported by helicopter to an undisclosed location, of course, in an unknown location, but still incredibly cool nonetheless. And with that, we're now going to move on to our next bit of Location Unknown news, where we see the Ukrainian soldiers load a bomblet. Now, it's an interesting video to see, of course, but there's a lot of things that kind of are like, you know, is that really safe? But anyways, I'm going to let y'all see the video, and we're going to take a look at this guy.
Днем народження тебе. Це від тебе персонально для псів.
Хорошенько вставляй. Погоди.
You now see them putting the bomblet in a cradle.
Не закрылся, закрылся.
Не закрылось?
Еще раз. Есть.
Пускай. Пускай.
And when you see that they were a little shaky about it at the start, they weren't really sure if the cradle was going to pop open and the bomblet would drop or what, but we can see that they did get the bomblet in the cradle, and the drone is now taking off, and it's heading out on its way to go and drop the bomblet.
Полетіла, сина, від тебе. Підарунок. З днем народження.
That's the end of the video, but it was a very precarious thing to watch. Honestly, if I was them, I would have flipped the drone upside down for a second, and then put the bomb on the cradle, the bomblet in the cradle, with it being upside down, so that way you didn't have the chance of the I guess you could say arms on the bottom of the bomb cradle opening up and that thing just dropping out in between your fingers and exploding on the ground. You know, then again, I'm not gonna critique them too much. Of course, they're out there fighting. They've been fighting for 106 days, and they've survived this long. And so apparently, whatever they're doing is working, or else they wouldn't be alive. So huge credit to them, of course. I always have to give the Ukrainian soldiers a lot of credit. And while this war has been going on for 106 days, and a lot of it's become kind of numb, really, because we see it happening time and time again, day after day. One always does have to note that the Ukrainians have been incredibly valiant and brave during the course of this entire war. We have hardly seen a single Ukrainian unit waver, flinch, or retreat in the face of the Russians, and we see that they still carry on today. Their morale is high, and they do dangerous stuff all the time in the name of the defense of their nation. And so I have to give them the hugest amount of respect possible. And with that, we're now going to move on to our next bit of Location Unknown news. In our next bit of Location Unknown news, we can see an attack on from a Stugna. This Stugna actually was fired at a Russian stockpile of ammunition and exploded on it. Of course, the Stugnas never fail, and everyone always has fun watching a Stugna video. And everyone always says it's wonderful to sit around the Stugna campfire. We can now see them aiming the Stugna. We can see a couple of infantry spread out. We can now see the Stugna missile on its way to the small little ammunition pile.
Я держу, все.
The missile is still traveling.
По стенам сейчас полетят.
Все. And a dead-on hit.
БК. Нормально. Чё? Они что-то поднесли туда. Выключай, все.
They hit the ammunition dead on, causing a sizable explosion. It didn't look like it was a massive one, but at least it was a moderate-sized explosion, and we know that a decent amount of that ammunition was knocked out. I just want to address something real quick. I actually saw someone in the chat, I'm not going to name them, but they said that Nicaragua is not in North America, it's in Central America. But if you're talking about continents, North America it includes Central America. There it is right there. So it's actually a part of the North American continent. Just wanted to cover that real quick before we move on. But we can see that, of course, the Stugna has not been used in an anti-tank role as we've normally seen. It's been used in an I guess you could say, personnel role, and it's still doing a pretty decent job. This isn't anything new. We've seen armed forces using ATGMs like the Stugnas, for example, the TOWs in Syria, against infantry a decent amount. And so while the strategy is not new, it is a little bit new for us to see Stugnas being transitioned from anti-tank to anti-personnel, and it looks like they're doing as good a job wiping out personnel as they were wiping out tanks. And so with that, we're now going to move on to our next bit of Location Unknown news, where we've seen shells explode right over the heads of the Ukrainians. This video is pretty self-explanatory, so I'm just going to let it run for a second and just let y'all see it.
Надо отходить. Надо отходить, Эрик.
You can see that the round exploded incredibly close to this trench. A large amount of dirt and other kinds of debris just started flying over into it. And you can see that the cameraman handled it fairly well. I mean, like, when you watch his reaction to it, right here, he just hunkered down a little bit, the shell exploded, and then he just got right back up. And of course, his friend was recording it as well, cradled down on the ground. The Ukrainians try and film as much as possible, and that's something that we've seen as a direct antithesis to what the Russians do. We've seen time and time again, the Ukrainians, as soon as anything happens, at least one of them whips out a phone to record it so that way they can show the world what's going on and what they're facing, and this is no exception, of course. And so, an interesting bit of video, and it's good to see that the Ukrainians were not killed in this explosion, and that they did survive, and the Russians, of course, were off the mark. We're now going to be moving on to our next bit of Location Unknown news, where we see some beautiful fields in this footage from a MiG-29. It's a very brief bit of footage. It's only 4 seconds long, but we can see most of the crops are growing in the fields. It appears that these haven't been pot-marked too much by artillery explosions. We can see a few of them intermittently in the fields. I'm not even sure if those are actually artillery explosions. Those may just be little spots of bushes. I can't really tell you for certain, but it is a very beautiful little bit of film. And we can also see the rear wing area of this MiG-29. A lot of y'all may be wondering, how do I know that's a MiG-29? Well, because of my head, who's always launched a load of footage about this stuff, I just know that a MiG-29's wing looks like that. I would pull it up and try and show something that would confirm that, but just take my word on it, that's a MiG-29, not an Su-27. So, a beautiful film, and of course, the world's a very beautiful place. It's very pretty, but it's neat to see that even the Ukrainian plains, as flat as this is, can still be pretty from the sky. And the rye or wheat or whatever this is that's growing in those fields is just such a vibrant yellow. I mean, like, that must be a real sight to see if you're actually flying over it. And it's definitely a sight for us to see here on film. And so with that, we're now going to move on to our next bit of Location Unknown news, where we finally see that the Wagner headquarters is burning. We didn't have the location when I put this down on the map, but I did find the location right before the stream. This appears to be a football field, and supposedly, and this has largely been confirmed, the Wagner group was using this stadium as a basing area for their forces and also kind of a command headquarters. And here in this film, we can see the whole entire thing burning to the ground. We can hear the woman crying in the film. I don't know if she loves the Wagner group or what, but we're going to actually go to the area where this happened. So while it's in the Location Unknowns, we actually did get a spot of where it was. Apparently, let me make sure I got this right in my head. Trying to think. It's near Luhansk. I think it was near Mikhailivka or Bryanka. It was in between Mikhailivka or Bryanka. Let's pull up Bryanka, and we're going to go get on Google Maps, and we're going to go into satellite footage, because all we have to do is find the football field. And if we find the football field, that's where it was. So let's zoom in here. Let's look for a football field real quick. Football field, football. That's not a football field. That's a lake. This is not Bryanka. We're now going to backtrack towards Yurivka. Could have been Yurivka. Yurivka is too small to have a football field, most likely. It's not Alfchesk. I know that for sure. Kadivka. I think it may have been Kadivka. Let me make sure. There it is. Here it is right here. We found it. This is the stadium that the Wagner Group was using as the headquarters for their forces. And we know that the Ukrainians managed to slam this side of the football field. You can see that here in the footage if I can get back on it. Let me go back up there and get to it. All right, so there's the building. And you can see some brownish dirt here on the side, and you can clearly see the outline of the football field here, and also the bleachers on the other side. And if we pop over to the other bit of footage, you can see this black area of ground. So the camera lady apparently standing right here where my mouse cursor is, and she's looking across the field to the other side of the stadium where the Wagner Group was based, well, at least their headquarters were based, and she's looking at the building burning out in the distance. We don't know how many Wagner Group soldiers this killed. We don't know what kind of damage this has exactly caused, but we can assume that the damage was significant. Based off of what I've heard, the Ukrainians may have attacked this with some kind of a ballistic missile or some kind of cruise missile. I'm not exactly sure about that. I'm still waiting on more information about what kind of a weapon was used to hit the stadium, but we do know that it caused enough damage to, of course, cause a large amount of structural damage that we can see here on the film, and also cause the entire thing to burn down. So hopefully this wiped out the Wagner Group's headquarters for a short while. They probably had some kind of contingency plan, so it will take them a while to set that up. It may be set up at this point, but one thing's for certain, the Wagner Group had some pretty difficult times today, and the Wagner Group's actually embroiled in a lot of controversy as well, and that's something worthy of discussing. So let's actually pull up the Wagner Group, so that way I can make sure I get a little bit of my facts right about it. And here it is, the Wagner Group. Now, the Wagner Group, much like I believe it was called Blackwater, is a private military company. This one, of course, is, in Russia, and has been used in the Syrian war. That's where it really got its name, was in the Syrian war. The Americans actually fought directly against the Wagner Group. A lot of people don't know this, but Russian forces and U.S. forces got into a couple of skirmishes in Syria directly against each other. And I believe almost every time the United States won these engagements and the Russians would withdraw, the Americans took a particular liking to the Wagner Group and tried to slam them out of existence and caused a whole lot of trouble to the point that the group, as far as I was told, the story that I've heard, they were almost decimated and they were withdrawn from Syria. And then, of course, they're now being used in this current invasion. So let's see. Apparently, right now, there's about 8,000 members in the Wagner Group. You can see that it's consistently been growing since 2016, according to Wikipedia, where the first number was made. And we can scroll down and let's see, origin, leader, organization, units. So we can see that this that it started in early 2016. So we know that the Wagner Group, of course, couldn't have been involved in the original Donbass conflict that started in 2014. Let's see here, relations with the Russian military, sanctions, operations. We want to find out. Hang on. Wagner was actually in 2014 during the annexation of the peninsula. So when was this thing founded? Let's see if we can find that out. First appeared in Ukraine in 2014. So it actually appeared at the very beginning of the Donbass conflict. I was wrong in saying 2016. It actually popped up in 2014. So let's scroll down. Find out a little bit more information about this group, at least its political standings, because a lot of people actually say that this is a fascist group, and so it's very ironic for the Russians to talk about fighting Nazism when they're literally using a Nazi PMC group. So let's see if we can find out any information about that. Let's see here. Actually, they look like they lose a decent amount of people. I mean, like, hell, 200 killed, 900 wounded. Based off their 2016 numbers, that means almost everyone in the organization was either killed or wounded. And that's off of their official numbers. Of course, death of journalists, other... hang on, let me scroll back up. Oh, come on. I mean, like, they've got to touch on the political affiliations of this group, can't they? Man, I don't think they will. Man, unfortunately, I can't get that information for us, but the controversial Wagner Group was hit today. We do know that for sure. At this very stadium, apparently, this says Stadion Pobiedy, which means the Victory Stadium. So the Ukrainians hit the victory stadium, which is ironic because this does not look like victory to me. It looks like failure. So with that, of course, great to see that the Wagner group was hit and knocked out. At least their command headquarters was, not the entire unit. And we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news. Here we can see Ukrainian soldiers under fire once again, this time by artillery once more. It appears that the Ukrainians had a load of close calls today on film, and this was another example. And so, here's the video.
Летить. Твою мать, блядь. Підараси, блядь. Отак, блядь, і живем. В однокомнатних квартирах. Ще раз.
We now hear the rounds still flying in, incredibly close.
Ще раз. Не мимо, бля. Єс. Підраси, бля. Підраси, близько, сука.
And that's the end of the video, but that artillery was incredibly close. Once again, another close call. I'm sorry for mispronouncing these words, y'all, but another close call for the Ukrainian forces. Luckily, they did manage to get through it unharmed in this video. With that, we're now going to move on to our next bit of news, where we can see the Russian assault begin. That's right, the Russians have once again begun another assault. This time, they've approached the Ukrainians completely unclothed in birthday suits. And when I say this, I mean this in absolute seriousness. These guys are coming for your washing machines. And so make sure to protect them, because here's the brunt of the Russian assault, completely unclothed in their original fashion.
Війна йде, бляха. Тут
There they are.
падла пасуться, нахуй.
They're going for the washing machines.
Хрю.
We can see the Ukrainian talking briefly to the Russians, telling him he surrendered and he wants no harm. And we can see that the Russians bypassed him and left him for dead. A very scary sight indeed. I'm very worried for this Ukrainian soldier with those kinds of Russian soldiers around, especially not being clothed, where you can see them in broad daylight like that. That must be very scary for that soldier. But in all seriousness, actually a pretty funny and cute little video that these pigs are using some kind of a little dirt path to just wander by this Ukrainian soldier. So beyond the joke, of course, pretty cute. And with that, we're going to move on to the next bit of news. In our next bit of news, we've actually seen the Ukrainians using M113s provided by Lithuania and driving them down a road. Of course, we don't know exactly where this is, but the M113s are pretty neat. Here we can see a Browning 50 cal on top. This is, of course, standard kit, I guess you could say, for an M113. They're almost always equipped with a 50 cal. And so that's the end of the video. Excuse me there. Sorry, coffee's gotten to me, but of course, the Ukrainians have been getting a large amount of supplies and aid from all around the world, and we know that the Ukrainians have gotten M113s from both the Lithuanians, the United States, and I believe a couple of other countries, but in a very, very small amount. But still, these little armored personnel carriers, while being somewhat dated, do help to provide that extra amount of transportation for the soldiers that the Ukrainians might need. Hopefully they don't use these things on the front lines because they have armor so thin you can generally shoot through it with most kinds of small arms. So in terms of armor protection, it's almost non-existent, but it can scoot around the field pretty easily and of course handle some rough terrain since it is a tracked vehicle. With that, we're now going to move on to our next bit of location unknown news, where we can see another close call. This is the third close call we've seen on film today. This is actually the other film. For some reason, it was duplicated, so sorry about that. We're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, and we've heard today, while this is associated with France, I couldn't actually pin down the location where the proximity fuse test was done. But we can see here that France has handed over proximity fuses for the 155mm howitzers equipped on the Caesar. We also had a video attached. I'm going to go to Twitter real quick to show this one. There was a video attached that showed what these proximity fuses do in slow motion. Here we can see some kind of a thing. I don't know what that is, but it's laid down on the ground, and we can see a testing range in general. Apparently the range is 28 kilometers, so I'm assuming that this round has been fired down range some 28 kilometers and is now exploding on the target. And you're about to see what a proximity fuse does. So here's the video of that. You can see that the shell comes down. Let me see if I can get this replayed at the right time. You see the shell right there comes down onto the target, but it does not explode on the ground like we've seen almost all artillery during this war do. This shell actually explodes a set height above the ground, as you can see there. And the shrapnel is then projected downwards and to the sides around everything else. We can now see this poor car. I don't even know what kind of car that is, sadly, so I can't really tell you what it is. This actually looks like it's somewhere in the southwestern United States. But we can now see another proximity fuse shell flying in towards this vehicle, and we're about to see what it can do to this unsuspecting SUV. Ooh, that looks rough. Let's go back to that real quick and take a look at that once more. Now, while this is called a proximity fuse, a lot of y'all know I'm not really a big fan of using the long and complicated jargon of the modern day. This, in my book, is called an airburst round. This is where it just explodes in the air. And you can call it a proximity fuse, sure, because it has a certain proximity where it'll explode above the ground. But in World War I, these things were called airburst shells. And, you know, and back in World War I, they had the simplest names for stuff, and it still got the same point across, like shell shock, medicine. You didn't call it medical gear and medical aid. You called it medicine, you know, stuff like that. But you can see this airburst shell here explode, and most of the shrapnel is directed straight downwards into the vehicle. So, of course, an incredible amount of force, and we can get the idea and get a very good assumption that this will be very effective against Russian tanks, because with the shell exploding directly above a vehicle like we see here and downwards into it, that of course will most likely penetrate the weak upper roofs of most tanks and cause the ammunition to explode, or maybe just the crew to be killed. But we can also see from that explosion there is a massive ring of shrapnel that goes outwards and downwards in every direction in a large radius. I'm not really sure what the specific radius of the shell is. I would have to, of course, get a lot of ballistics figures on that to tell you that. But I would guess that it's at least over 50 yards in diameter. And so all of that shrapnel is being projected straight down towards the ground, towards the soldiers. And so in this regard, this shell for its shrapnel qualities alone is much more effective against infantry than your normal, I guess you could say, shell. Well, I don't have a specific name for it, but a shell that slams dead into the ground and explodes. The shrapnel from this is going to be much more effective. This is how you would kill infantry much quicker and much more effectively. This is also why, going into a little bit of World War I history, so some people may understand why helmets were designed this way, a lot of people remember the Stahlhelm. We're going to pull up the M1918 Stahlhelm first, and I would say that this is really the beginning of modern helmet design. Of course, this is synonymous with the Germans, you know, of course, the Imperial Germans and later on the Nazi Germans. But we can see here an example of the M1918 helmet. You can see that it had a very wide brim on the front. And while this helmet, of course, was moving away from that, and later on we would see with the M35 Stahlhelm, the brim on the front was almost entirely removed, and the helmet only covered the upper cranium. World War I helmets were designed for these kinds of rounds, and here's a perfect example. The reason why I pulled up that Stahlhelm was kind of to show the beginning of modern helmets, and now we're going to show what British helmets were designed for at the time, which I think was a very smart design considering what they were going up against. They used these helmets called Brodie helmets. At least that's what I call them. That's what the American name for them is. But here you can see a Brodie helmet. Of course, the Americans had a slightly different design, but you can see one here. Now, this helmet didn't really cover a large amount of the lower head, or really any of it at all. The helmet only covered the upper area of the skull and had a large brim that protruded from all sides in every direction. I guess you could say it was kind of like a brimmed hat, at best, maybe a kettle hat, if you wanted to describe it as that. And the whole reason for the design of this helmet, which I believe it's very effective in its purpose, was so this brim would protect your face from shrapnel, if you're watching my mouse cursor, flying down and going straight into your face. And that's what the purpose of the brim served. And so modern helmets, of course, they protect the upper part of your head, but they don't have brims on them that will protect you from shrapnel that's coming at a downwards angle towards you and hitting you in the face. So in that regard, this helmet was pretty decent in its protective abilities against shrapnel. And so this helmet was in that direction. Of course, it was pretty effective at what it did. That's why it became kind of the modern principle for most helmets. But of course, this kind of shell is going to cause a large amount of damage to infantry and maybe a decent amount of damage to armored vehicles as well if it does explode directly over them. And so I hope that the Ukrainians, of course, can get a large amount of these and use them to a great extent, because, of course, we don't wish for them to use anything poorly. And I think that they'll have a lot of luck with these. With that, we're now going to move on to the last 2 bits of Location Unknown news, where we can see some rock-solid armor. And when I mean rock-solid, I mean rock solid. This stuff is literally made out of rocks. Apparently the Russians have gotten some ideas in their head that apparently gravel inside of mesh cages can stop some kind of anti-tank rounds. And so in the absence of the contact armor, which is usually put in saddlebags on the side of the tank to try and protect the tank a little bit more, they've now decided that gravel will do, and they've now packed these mesh cages with gravel in a vain attempt to try and stop their vehicle from getting destroyed by an anti-tank round. I don't think rocks are going to help all too much. But of course, I hope that the Russians believe in the rocks and they put themselves in greater danger and get their tanks destroyed a little bit quicker based off of this false hope that these rocks will help them. We can also see that they put some rocks on the front glacis, and honestly, it's just pointless at that point. If something's going through the front glacis, which we know on the T-72B3 has Contact 5 armor, which is some of the most up-to-date and advanced armor in the Russian arsenal, the gravel is not going to stop it. So, with that, we're going to move on to the next bit of news, but I just want you all to remember this is how desperate Russians have gotten, is that they're now starting to put gravel containers on the side of their tanks and hope that that will stop an anti-tank round. And so with that, we're now moving on to our last bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see that there has been another entry into the turret throwing Olympics. That's right. There is now a new segment in the Olympics specifically for turret throwing. Here we can see the Russians try for another world record. Let's take a look. So we can see them prepping, and it looks like the turret is out. We can't see it now, and it appears that it's on its way towards the moon, and that might be setting a new world record. We can't even see the tank down there anymore. I don't even know if the hull exists. The explosion was so large. But that's the end of the video. I honestly think if we go back and watch that a little bit more, and seriously, I don't even think the turret survived. It looks like the turret may have been ripped into multiple pieces. So let's watch that again. Wait a minute. Nope. There it is. There's the turret right there. And it's going for the high vault. So wish them the best of luck. I hope that they did manage to break the new world record. And maybe they can get a gold medal for something in the Olympics so that you don't have to drug out their athletes for too much. So with that, of course, an interesting video to see, and it was certainly a fireball that came out of that T-72. It's very rare for us to actually see a fireball of that magnitude come out of a main battle tank. Usually those kinds of explosions come from SPGs like a Mista, but it appears that this tank had a lot of explosive filler in it, and it certainly made for quite the show. And so with that, we've now covered all of the location unknowns, and we're about to start moving into the Kharkiv area and the northern Donbass. But before we do that, we're of course going to take a quick break for a second to answer 3 questions from the chat and also recognize super chatters who are helping this channel to run. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and before I get to the first super chat of the night, I just want to mention once again to everybody, thank you very much for all of your support via super chat and otherwise. And if you have a question for us and don't want to put in a super chat, feel free to tag either me or the Enforcer, and I will put it in the spreadsheet, and hopefully we have enough time to answer them all. So up first on our super chats, we have a $50 donation from Mr. Dr. Batman, who says, I read earlier that over 4,000 troops surrendered from Mariupol and are being held in the Donbass. Did you see this? I feel there are conflicting reports from Mariupol since the so-called surrender. Thanks for the great reporting, guys, and keep it up.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. It, of course, helps our channel greatly, and that kind of support, of course, always helps us to run. And so I got to thank you for it. And to answer that question, we haven't been able to get a lot of hardcore information as well, but I'm going to tell you the picture that I've seen unfold that I believe is largely true. The Azovstal has fallen completely. We haven't gotten any news out of there lately to show that there's any remnants left, although the commander and the co-commander were never turned in. At least the news we got said that. And so there's somewhere out there they may have been killed and that we may have just never heard about it. It's something like that, but no, by and large, the Ukrainian garrison surrendered in mass on May 17th, nearly 3 weeks ago. We know that thousands of them were involved in that surrender, and they were, of course, whisked away to prisoner of war camps. We know that a large prisoner of war camp is actually in the village of Olenivka, and a decent amount of the Azov unit is being held there. Specifically, that Azov unit. There's about 3 of them in the country that we know of that are on the front. So beyond that, we don't actually have any news to say, anything beyond that, like if there's a holdout or what, because that information has never been gotten from us. As far as we know, Mariupol is now a quiet city. The front line has moved on, but of course the devastation still remains. But beyond that, it looks like the Azov has surrendered entirely at this point, or the remnants that were left in the Azovstal have been wiped out. So with that, I thank you very much for the support once again. It helps us out a huge deal, and I hope that does answer the question, at least on our end. And it may be an incorrect assumption. We're once again trying to piece together the picture of what's happened in Mariupol based off of the amount of news we've gotten. But even our news has been a little bit vague as to what actually happened after the commander and co-commander said they're not surrendering. They have some kind of special mission. We never heard from them again, and so we don't know what's happened to them or what's happened to the remainder of the Azov defenders that refused to surrender. My assumption is that they may have been killed, or they surrendered as well later on, and it was kind of a quiet thing. And so with that, I thank you once again. I hope that does answer the question, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And yes, thank you very much, Mr. Dr. Batman, for that very generous support. And up next, we have a $45 donation from a channel regular, Praise Adonai, who says, Enforcer, some say that the U.S. pressed Ukraine in order to force a regime change in Russia. We need a soapbox sermon to boost morale of the Leaf Spring Army on how David decked Goliath, i.e. Ukraine versus Russia. How does Western history hinge on a win?
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and to get on the soapbox for a second, the defense of Ukraine is vital to the security of the Western world and also Western interests. A lot of people don't really think in the board game perspective of how world diplomacy unfolds and also our spheres of influence, but as the United States, as pretty much the sole world superpower at the moment, we have to ensure that our interests abroad are kept in place. If we allow other countries to have room to exert their own spheres of influence and grow their own power, we could be looking at a major contest in between the United States and a rival nation. And so, of course, it is crucially important for us as a nation to ensure that we keep Western Europe safe and also Eastern Europe, which has just emerged as pretty much a brand new entity after 80 years of being a puppet of the Soviet Union or other countries, for example, the Nazi Germans in the 40s. And we have to make sure that a country like Ukraine, as large as it is, of course, with the amount of, I guess you could say, raw materials it produces, specifically food, and also other things, and also its strategic importance to the West. It is, of course, within striking distance of Volgograd, which does put a massive advantage to us over the Russians. We have to make sure that the Ukrainians can win. Also, another thing, moving beyond all of our strategic interests and ensuring that the Western world stays on top, in a way, because and I have to explain this a little bit, because people, of course, are saying, why should we be making sure the Western world stands on top? The thing is that everyone in the world is trying to get their little group to the top. The Indians have their own group. It's really just themselves. And they try and ensure that they'll be staying on top. Of course, they're joined by the Bangladeshis, but beyond that, they're really on their own. And they're trying to climb to the top. The Chinese are pretty much on their own. Of course, they have a friend in North Korea, but that's hardly a friend. They really have nothing going for them. And the Russians are just, mutually cooperative with them. And the Chinese are trying to, of course, project their own interests. Then you have the Russians. The Russians have the CSTO. That consists of Belarus and a lot of the Stan series countries in Central Asia. And then there is the West, which comprises of the United States, most Western European countries, Japan. I mean, they're not a Western country. Obviously, they're a Far Eastern country. But Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Norway, and a couple of other nations, of course, in Western Europe. Of course, the large ones come to mind, UK, France, Germany. But we are all in pretty much one same unit, and we're trying to ensure that our alliance, our group, will be able to stay on top of things and make sure that things go our way. Because by and large, that's pretty much what it all comes down to in the world, is making sure that our interests are secured. And if that means that we have to put other groups down, like the Russians, for example, their own interests, that's just what we do. But moving back on into Ukraine, so now that we've gotten through that whole entire discussion of why it doesn't necessarily sound good, but that's how the world works, moving back to Ukraine, Ukraine is defending its own sovereignty, and of course, Ukraine is a self-determining nation. That means it's a democracy. A democracy has a right to do what it pleases, and it is a sovereign country. And so, if the Ukrainians, as a people, decide on their own volition, with no external influence from the West, that they would like to become members of the European Union and eventually members of NATO, they have a right to do that. And that's also falling within our sphere of interests and, a sphere of influence in Eastern Europe. The Russians, of course, playing the board game, do have the right to say that they do not agree with that. One thing that they do not have the right to do, though, is to invade a sovereign nation like Ukraine and try and annex it or install a puppet government and overthrow these people who have democratically chosen to go a certain path. That's something that we can allow, and that's also spreading an image, if we allow it to happen, that the West is weak. And this kind of course, falls into the domino effect thing, which is, this is literally a repeat of the domino effect. But if Ukraine was to fall, what's to say the Russians wouldn't start to make demands of Finland, and then eventually demands of the Baltic states and the Poles, which would most likely be the very last thing they did, considering that that would be the largest one as an obstacle to overcome. If the Russians were to win in Ukraine, the West would look weak, and the Russians would feel emboldened to try and expand their sphere of influence into Eastern Europe again, and may try and bring Finland under their reign as a puppet country, the Baltic states once again as a puppet country, or maybe even annex them, and then annex or subjugate Poland. And so in that regard, if Ukraine was to lose, much like we saw in World War II with Hitler and the idea of appeasement that the West had at the time, we could see that happening here. And so it's very important in that regard as well that we ensure that the Ukrainians are able to hold on to this war and also win. So with that, I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that soapbox did connect the dots, at least in a way, and explain why it's important for Ukraine to win, at least for our interests and their interests. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, and we're going to be moving on to our final question of this segment, and then we're going to be moving on into Kharkiv and the northern Donbass.
And the last one goes to another channel legend, Chris Mack, who puts in a $20 super chat and says, "So appreciate the Enforcer Matt, and the Leaf Spring Army." And Chris, we appreciate you as well, and thank you for being a viewer for a tremendous amount of time, and thank you for your support of the channel as well.
And I thank you very much for the support of the channel as well. It's always great to get so much support from our viewers, not just in, monetary support, which is great, and that keeps us running, of course. So I can't ever just negate that and act like it doesn't matter. That's the way we eat. But beyond that, it's always great to hear that people do enjoy the efforts we go through to try and report this news. This takes up a huge amount of my time every day. Actually, around 4:30 my time, because these streams actually run at 9 o'clock for me. 4:30 my time, I start working, and I don't stop working until 1. And if I ever respond to comments, which I've largely cut out now because I just don't have enough time with college starting, then I have to contend with that as well, which adds even more time. So I'm looking at around 9 to 10 hours a day. Some days, of course, trying to respond and work with everything. And then on top of that, I now have college to do again. And so that's now eating up my time as well. And so, of course, I'm hugely appreciative of all of the support we get for what we do. It always makes me feel like what I'm doing is worthwhile, that people do enjoy it and support it. And I hope we get this kind of support when we start branching out into other things in the future. We're still trying to work on that Browns Ferry video. There's been no progress on it, but it's still in my head and it's still something that I think about. And it is eventually a path that I do want to go down, is starting to talk about other things in the world, like transportation, infrastructure, energy, economics, diplomacy, war in general, history. Like, there's a million things I want to cover. Of course, I'll have to get to a point where I can do that, and hopefully that's soon. So with that, once again, I thank you so much for the support. It does mean a lot to us. And with that, we're now going to move on to the Kharkiv area and the northern Donbass. Starting off near Kharkiv, we have gotten a small amount of news from the front lines. It is just a tidbit. It's literally almost nothing, but it's still news. We've seen that the Ukrainians apparently have moved into the village of Vesely, which is just about a 1.5 mile advance from where they were before, but it's still an advance, which is a sign of progress in this area. Of course, I'm not going to overplay it. 1.5 miles is a very small amount of ground to take, but we could see in a video today that some Russian vehicles near this brand new front line where they've been pushed back were destroyed by United Kingdom supplied brimstone missiles. So let's watch the video of these Russian vehicles I believe those may be the Brimstone launchers. I can't really tell. But either it's the Russian vehicles getting destroyed by the Brimstones, or it's the Brimstone launchers launching the Brimstones. Here's the video. Actually, those are definitely the Brimstone launchers. But you can see them launching the Brimstones, and the Brimstones are now on their way. And we can now see the drone footage of those Brimstones hitting their targets. One after the other, they pop tank after tank, and hopefully they'll be having a turret throwing competition here in a minute. We can now see another vehicle get hit, a third Russian vehicle destroyed in this one film. The Brimstones seem to be incredibly effective, and while the British haven't provided a massive amount of support, the support they have provided has been vital to Ukraine's defense, as one can see here in this video. The Brimstones took out 3 tanks in quick succession in less than about 20 seconds. And when you put that into mind, I would have to say you have to give huge thanks to the British for providing such a competent anti-tank missile system as the Brimstone, where these missiles can be fired in mass and destroy multiple targets at the same time. It's a great ability for the Ukrainians to possess, and I'm sure that it's giving them an edge on the battlefield wherever this thing is used. So with that, we haven't gotten any more news from the Ukraine, the northern Kharkiv salient. There's been no news coming out of here for the most part over the past few weeks, as the salient has largely fallen quiet and both sides have fallen static. Now, one thing I am going to observe at this point in the war is that the front lines are starting to fall static everywhere. The Ukrainians aren't really pushing much in most places, and the Russians also aren't pushing much in others, and it's showing war exhaustion. Now, it's not showing war exhaustion as in the soldiers are tired, it's showing war exhaustion as in the supplies on both sides apparently are dwindling, because they're just running out of the ability to carry on a war. And this is usually what starts to happen, is that wars move incredibly fast at the very beginning, supplies are chewed up and spat out within seconds. And then after about a few months of that, everything starts to slow down a whole load. And so, I'm going to be honest, this war may be going on for a really long time at this point, because based off of what we're seeing, there's only small battles going on across the front lines. I believe this front line is actually about the same length as the front line that was in World War I in France. And so with that in mind, we're about to see pretty much a very similar kind of warfare unfold here in Ukraine. And we've even seen them using a large amount of trenches. And so, not trying to say that this is like a retrograde thing, like they're now going back to World War I, but at the same time, it's starting to look like things are starting to level out. Now, there is one way to fix this. Of course, the West can provide more arms and aid to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have been saying if they get a certain number of artillery pieces and enough ammunition to provide for them, they will be able to conduct successful counterattacks across the front lines and start pushing the Russians back. But the question is, will Western nations provide these additional artillery pieces to the Ukrainians to then push them back, or is that a psyops by the Ukrainians to make the Russians, well, that's going into what the Ukrainians may be doing, but still, hopefully these static lines can be broken and the Ukrainians can start making some kind of headway, because it would be terrible if this war started to drag on into a stalemate and it started to turn into what happened in the Donbass, which is where these front lines stay where they are. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on down past the Kharkiv area. Of course, nothing to report in Chuhuiv, as usual. And we're now going to move down towards the Balaklia area. Today, we've seen the 25th Brigade has been hitting Russian units around here as well. And we can see in this video, they destroy an MTLB and a BMP-1. Of course, copyrighted music here. But here we can see that MTLB sitting inside of this tree line. And now we can see one of these vehicles burning, and we can also see the artillery flying in and striking around these Russian units. We can see a BMP-1 right there in the field, and we can now see that an artillery shell exploded right nearby. We can now see another shell explode nearby. That one appeared to be near the MTLB, which is already smoking. You know, I wonder if Mark Zuckerberg would have a holiday with these smoking vehicles, because I bet everyone remembers that weird, awkward video he made about, yeah, I'm out here smoking my meats. And I wonder if he would be sitting here talking about smoking my tanks if he was out here in Ukraine. I know that's a very stupid thing to bring up, but that just crossed my mind. I thought I'd share it with you all. Anyways, we now see more artillery shells landing around the BMP-1, which appears to have already had its engine bay flipped up. And I don't know if I'm seeing this right, but does it look like to y'all that the engine may be missing out of that tank? because it looks like the engine bay is empty. I don't know what happened to that BMP, but we can see that the MTLB certainly burned out and maybe had some kind of ammo detonation, as all of the hatches are now open on that MTLB. Of course, the Ukrainians have knocked out a couple of extra armored personnel carriers, and that's, of course, great to see, and hopefully they can continue on to inflict Russian losses, although we have been getting the idea that these losses have been decreasing as the front lines have started to become static. With that, we're now going to be moving on to our next bit of news further down the line. There's been nothing to report in Izium, and I'm also going to make note of a large frontline change we've made here. I've gotten the general idea because, forgive me for sinning, but I have actually referenced a couple of maps here and there, and a lot of maps were showing that the Russians had taken this area a long time ago. The problem is that whenever I make maps and whenever I make changes to my maps, I usually have to confirm that information with video evidence. And so I have never been able to change that part of the map because I've never gotten any video evidence to confirm that the Russians have pushed the Ukrainians back out of this area. Which occurred around 3 weeks ago, as far as I know. But today, I finally got some video evidence to show that the Russians have pushed the Ukrainians back out of this area to the spot that we had believed, and apparently the Russians have made a small advance today from Urova down to the village of Sviat or Hirsk. I believe that may be the pronunciation. Sorry if I butchered it. But we can see the Russian army entering this village today, which does have a bridge that crosses the Severodonetsk River. The Ukrainians have most likely already destroyed it, so it's not really too much of a concern. And we're going to visit this village here in a second. But anyways, here's the video. Of course, I have to keep the sound muted. As we can see, some artillery shells that kicked up some dust in the area. We can also see a large monastery down here near the bottom of the screen. And we're going to visit this village here in a second on Google Maps because it's actually a pretty one. We now see the drone looking around the city. Not really seeing much evidence of Russian movements at this point in the video. But we do see a tank further down the road. It appears to... Well, actually, there's a second one further behind it, but we don't see any Z markings on them from this distance, so I'm not sure if they're Ukrainian or Russian. And while we're watching this video and waiting for more evidence of Russian activity, I'm going to answer a question from the chat that I just saw. Someone said, let me make sure I can find it real quick. Oh, where did it go? L.A. Smith said, my grandpa was a signal corps telegrapher in Ardennes bunker in World War I. Where'd you get the idea for the helmet on the avatar and the Morse code in the intro? I actually got the idea for the helmet and stuff because I'm World War I reenactor, so that profile picture is actually me. And then the idea of the Morse code in the intro was also another idea for me because I'm a huge World War I buff, and Morse code was used a very decent amount in the First World War along with other signaling systems, but that's the one I could use on stream. Obviously, I can't pull out a carrying pigeon, well, a homing pigeon, and just throw that thing in the screen and, you know, let people see that. That wouldn't work. But getting back to the video, I'm believing that these are Russian tanks because they continuously show these and they are hanging out near the bottom of this hotel. But this drone has not zoomed in well enough for us to actually get a good idea of whether these are Ukrainian or Russian. But we did get confirmation today that the Russians did enter this village. So, let's pull up Lehman. Go to the map. Nope, not Lehman, South Carolina. Lehman, Ukraine. And we're going to go to Lehman. Hop on there. Then we're going to put it on layers and get rid of that. We're now going to go over to this village. Now, a lot of y'all may actually remember this monastery from a long time ago, and I've been trying to confirm where this thing had been. But it's actually within this very small town, and we can actually see that it has a sizable amount of very nice hotels. And this is telling me that apparently this is a vacation spot for the Ukrainians. You can just see all of the hotel markers, and you can actually see some very creative ones out here in the distance. Let's take a look at these and see what this village looked like. Oh, this is neat. Look, it's like a little garden travel lodge thing. Now, this is cool. This is a place I would hang out on vacation. Oh, yeah, look at that. I like this. That's neat. Let's go check out another one real quick. We're, of course, not going to be taking a travel vlog or anything here, but I still want to get a good idea of what we're looking at. This actually appears to maybe be the hotel they were... Now, that's really cool. This is a really cool one. You can actually see the monastery right over there across the Severodonetsk River. And this is really neat. I mean, like, this village looks really cool. Hopefully it doesn't get destroyed. We know that the monastery has already taken some damage during the course of this war. We can also see a statue of apparently an influential figure. Unfortunately, I don't know who. We can also see some stuff that's apparently served in their deli. I'm assuming that is some kind of a Ukrainian snack. It doesn't look like a charcuterie board. We can also see some restaurants and such things like that. But that monastery is incredibly pretty. It was actually built in around the late 1600s, and so it's been around for quite a while. And it's an important site in Ukrainian history. But here in that video, of course, we can see the Russian forces have managed to take this town, and that means that the Ukrainians have now had to retreat to the other side of the river, and they've most likely destroyed the bridge. We don't have any information to confirm any of that yet, but that would be usual practice, of course, to ensure that the Russians do not cross the river and get a foothold on the other side. But, of course, a little bit of unfortunate news, but we've got good news to counter it. While the Russians took one village, the Ukrainians took another. The Ukrainians actually managed to push the Russians out of the village of Dubrova today and retook this village on the exact same time that the Russians took the village with the monastery in it. Now, I'm saying village with monastery. I know the name of it. It's just that I don't want to try and pronounce it because I'm going to butcher it. But here's the video of the Ukrainians retaking Dubrova. Here we can see them panning around. We can see two soldiers walking down a street. We can see them showing more of the village. It looks like a nice village. Some very sizable houses here. We can now see the Ukrainians striking this area with artillery as they're trying to push the Russians back out of the village. We can now see the buildings burning in the background as the artillery has hopefully uprooted the Russians from their positions in the village and has allowed the Ukrainians to advance. We can see a group of soldiers apparently speed walking down a road, now moving to the side. We're not sure if these are Ukrainian or Russian forces. We can't really get a clear beat on who they are. We can now see a vehicle burning in the courtyard of this house, and I have to once again say that's a very nice house. Apparently, from what I know about European culture, it's a by and large principle that very rich people live in the countryside, while the lower class of people, I guess you could say, live within the urban areas, which is something interesting to me because it's actually the opposite in the United States. Most wealthy people live within the cities and the suburbs surrounding the cities. Mostly it's the suburbs surrounding the cities. But then I guess you could say, poorer people, I don't really want to say that because that sounds rude, but still, they live in the country. So there's kind of a bit of a reversal in cultures in between what you see in Ukraine and what you see here in the United States, which is very interesting to me, because every time we see one of these small villages in the middle of nowhere that you would think, oh, you know, it's probably a quaint village filled with nice country people. No, it looks like they have mega mansions out there. But anyways, with that, we're now going to be moving on to our next bit of news outside of that area. And beyond that bit of news, there's been no advances in the Lyman area. It appears that the Ukrainians held their ground and pushed the Russians back a little, but of course the Russians did manage to take the village over here on the very far, I guess you could say, western flank of Lyman. And so I guess you could say they have made a little bit of progress, but I'm not sure if you consider that the Izium area or the Lyman area, considering it's almost in between them. So with that, we're now going to move further behind the lines near Dubrova, where today we can see that an OSA anti-air system used by the Ukrainians managed to shoot down a Russian drone. Let's take a look at this film. We now see that the missile is on its way. And we can now see the drone falling to the ground. What a pitiful sound. Listen to the sound of me. It just went whoop. and just made a pitiful little plop sound like a sack of potatoes hitting the ground. Oh, that's sad. I don't know why it's sad, but that's pitiful. And you can see the drone burning out there in the distance, and we can see that that OSA scored a kill. So someone needs to whip out the white paint and start painting a kill mark on the side of that OSA because it's gotten another one. So with that, we're now going to be moving further on down the front, and we're now going to start moving towards the Severodonetsk area. Now, I wish I could say that there was conclusive results today from one side or the other as to what happened in the city, but sadly, I can't say that. We don't know what's going on in Severodonetsk. The fighting is incredibly intense as far as we know, but both sides have not made progress over the past 48 hours in either pushing one out or pushing the other. We have seen, however, excuse me, once again, coffee has gotten to me, but we can see that there was a battle in the industrial zone of the city, which is getting closer to the riverbanks, and we can see that here in this video. You can see the smoke rising up in the distance. We can also see evidence that this is the industrial district, and we can hear the fire in the distance as the Russians and the Ukrainians are brawling for control of the city. You hear a massive explosion in the distance. We can't see the plume from the explosion. We have this massive watermark here in the middle of the video. That's the end of the video, but one thing I find really interesting about Soviet-style towns, I guess you could say Soviet-era cities, is that you can see where the cities end because the whole entire city is practically made up of commie blocks. And so once the commie blocks end, that's just the end of the city. And it's really weird to me that the Soviets just built cities like that, and they just ended up being that way, and they stay that way, mostly because no one's had the money to replace them. Of course, an interesting little bit of history about these apartment blocks. Khrushchevkas were actually built as a temporary housing fix. When Khrushchev was in power, there was a housing crisis in the Soviet Union where there was hardly enough housing for their population, and there was a problem with there being too much of a growth in their population and not enough housing. And so Khrushchev implemented a new housing system, which became known as the Khrushchevka, which then, of course, got the nickname Commie Block, where they build these prefab buildings, which are prefabricated. Most of the parts are assembled prior, and then they're just built on site to temporarily house people in, and it was assumed that these buildings would become unlivable in about 20 years, and by that point, the Soviets, in their minds, would have fixed the housing issue and saved everyone. Well, that never really turned out to be, and the Khrushchevka commie blocks are still being used to this day, which is around 60 years after they were made, or even further beyond that. I mean, like, hell, a lot of them went up in the early 60s, and so it's been about 60 years that these buildings have stood, and they were only supposed to last for 20. And so these things have pretty much withstood time 300% longer than they were supposed to be habitated. And so you can get an idea of really how poor the I guess you could say Soviet economic and I guess you could say central planning of their economy was, because a lot of things were done like that. Like, you had to get on a 10-year wait list for a telephone, like a landline phone inside of your house or a car. So, you know, that's another principle of that. But of course, it's really interesting to see a city laid out like this. And we still know that the Ukrainians are engaged in pitched battles with the Russians for control over this town. The Ukrainians have said that they're not giving up this town. The Russians have also said they're not giving up this town. So I don't know what the Ukrainian plan is with this town, but still, they're not going to give it up without a fight. And so we're going to see over the next few days how it unfolds. Right now, the results are inconclusive. We're now going to move further back behind the front lines, and we're going to take a look at this clip where we can see another Ukrainian Hurricane being used against the Russians at night. And so here's the footage. Of course, I have to keep it muted. There is copyrighted music. Well, you can see the rockets taking flight and hopefully making their way towards Russian targets. The flare from the rocket's motor illuminates the ground and lets us see what's actually out there, which is just nothing but grass and a couple of Ukrainian soldiers. You know, there's always something fascinating about watching MLRS's fire at night. I mean, I don't know why, I just find it a very interesting thing, but that's the end of the video, and we hope that that artillery fire is being directed right onto a Russian unit and hits them dead on, causing a decent amount of damage. With that, we're now going to be moving on to the area around Bila Ora, which, surprisingly enough, if I remember Cyrillic correctly, this would actually be pronounced Bila Gora instead of Bila Ora or Hora. I'm not really sure which one that's supposed to be pronounced like, but we can see here that a Ka-52 was firing rockets near the front line once again today. And the caption says supporting Russian ground forces, but with an upward angle like that, firing off its rockets, how in the world is it supporting Russian ground forces? This thing's bombarding an entire city. But here's the video.
Ебать, бросил нам.
See the next Ka-52 firing right over them and giving these guys tinnitus.
Ебать, нормально бросил.
And that's the end of the video. Once again, just another helicopter rocket attack. Not really much to note there. With that, we're now going to start moving further down the front, and we're going to get to our last bit of northern Donbass news. Here near Severodonetsk today, we've seen Russian forces in action. Of course, I always have to give the disclaimer when showing these kinds of videos. This may be fake. The Russians might not even be near the front lines, but they did say it was from the Donbass, and so I tried to make sure to include it. And so, here's the video of the supposed Russian forces in the Donbass. You can hear some gunfire. And they're actually in a firefight. We can actually hear the bullets snapping off the ground and whistling past them, and so we know that they are certainly in a firefight. A first on Russian film. And we can still hear the fire bouncing off the ground and ricocheting around them, making that distinct little whistling or screaming sound. And so with that, we don't really have a lot of information as to how this firefight concluded or anything. It was only an 18-second clip, but we could see the Russians engaged in a firefight. Hopefully these forces were knocked out and the Ukrainians were able to hold their ground, but we don't really know for certain. And so with that, that is the end of the northern Donbass news, and we're about to start moving down into the southern Donbass news, and also the rest of the southern front, along with the remainder of the country and the speech from Zelensky. But before we actually get to all of that, we're once again going to take a quick pause and answer 3 questions from the chat, and then we'll move back on to the southern front news. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and first up, we have a $20 donation from D. Shaw, who is a channel regular. He doesn't leave a comment, but we appreciate your contribution there. Mr. Shaw, we appreciate it very much, and thank you for watching the stream for a very, very long time. And Enforcer, would you like to add anything to that?
And I would. I thank you very much, Shaw, for providing support. You've been around for an incredibly long time, of course, and have helped out this channel a huge deal. And I have to thank everyone so much for supporting this channel because, of course, I give this little spiel, but I always feel like it's very important for everyone to know. We literally survive off of y'all's generosity. So, you know, we make no money on ads. I've said this before, and it still stays true. We make absolutely no money on ads. If you see an ad being run on one of our videos, that's the only reason for that is because we've lost the monetization rights to that video, and it's been monetized by someone else, like a song company or a news company that's gotten the monetization rights to it. So we don't make any money off of AdSense. The only way we, as a channel, make money to support ourselves and keep on doing this as a job is through our viewers directly. And so without y'all's support, much like you, D. Shaw, which I thank you so much for, our channel could not keep running. And it means a lot to me that a lot of people enjoy this content so much that they actually want to keep us running and let us know that they do enjoy it and they want to see more of it as the work continues on. So I thank you once again, D. Shaw, for the massive amount of support. Of course, you didn't leave a comment. I wish I could answer a question for you, but I guess you consider the show good enough of, I guess, a return to your investment. And so with that, I thank you once again for the support. It does help with this channel a lot. And with that being said, we're going to be moving on to the next question, but I got to thank you once again.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from Red Palace, who says, you guys have been leading national news networks with accurate information, and you should really start tooting your own horns about it. Slava Ukraine.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, but one thing I'm always very aware about, and I don't want to do much, is toot my own horn, because while, of course, Matthew can tell you, of course I joke around in the background, I'm like, that news sucks, whenever we watch Fox or CNN and stuff like that. I don't ever want to say that stuff too much and get, too full of myself, because I feel like getting too full of myself would be a bad thing, and it's very good to keep myself in check. Of course, while a lot of people do hold high regard for this channel, and I'm very glad that a lot of people do, and I hope that y'all do keep us in high regard, I don't want to sit there and, of course, like, get full of myself, because then I could start getting cocky and start acting like everything I say is definite, and I don't want to do that kind of stuff. That would stop me from being me. And so, while I do want to toot my own horn, I don't want to do it to the point I kind of lose who I am in a way, which I don't really try and take credit for too much. But with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I'm glad that you do enjoy the channel to the point that you want us to toot our own horns. And we may, just know that if I do that, it's only to try and get more support for the Sunday fundraisers and maybe bring in more people to watch the news. And with that, I thank you so much for the support and also for the high praise as well of our news coverage. It does mean a lot to me that a lot of people find it reliable. And with that being said, we're going to move on to our last question of this segment, and then we're going to move on down to the southern Donbass, the southern front, the remainder of the news around the country, and finally, the speech from Zelensky. And so, what is our last question for the night, Matthew?
So our last one for this segment goes to Carolyn, who puts in a $20 donation and says, "No reports of Bayraktar attacks lately. Do you know why? I look forward to your stream each night, and thank you very much."
Well, thank you so much for the support. And could you reread that first part to me real quick, Matthew? It literally just ran out of my head.
Carolyn said, "No reports of Bayraktar attacks lately, and do you know why?"
I haven't heard of any reports of Bayraktar attacks, but I have heard an explanation why. Apparently, Bayraktar attacks have now become a state secret, and so if that information was true, which is what I heard, they may be using them to a sizable extent. It's just that we don't really know because they're no longer publishing any information about how they're being used. I'm not really sure if that's true or not. I'm going to have to try and look into that a little bit more, but that has been the explanation that I've heard so far. But take that one with a grain of salt, because I don't really have enough to verify that one with. So as far as I know, I'm not really sure why we don't hear any more Bayraktar news. Of course, there's a couple of reasons that maybe the cause. For example, all of them a large amount of them may have been destroyed. Maybe they don't have enough of the proper munitions to use them. There's a lot of explanations why, but right now I'm not entirely sure. But the answer I've gotten is that their usage has become a state secret. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does answer the question. And I once again want to thank everyone so much for supporting this channel and helping us to keep doing what we're doing. Without y'all's support, this channel couldn't keep running. And so I thank you all, once again, everyone who's thrown in the super chat for the night. And don't worry, if you are a first-time super chatter and you just threw in the super chat, or if you've thrown in the super chat before, we do answer every single question by the end of the night if it's sent in by super chat. We also try and answer as many live chat questions as we can as well. And so if you would like to ask a live chat question, because you do not always have to pay to get a question answered on here, just @Enforcer or @EnforcerMatt in your message, and then type in your question, and that will give Matthew a little flag. It puts like an orange color on our name tags, and he can see that question and then throw it down in a spreadsheet for us to potentially ask later. I mean, you may not be able to get around to every live chat question, but we try and get around to the best ones possible. And so with that, we're now going to start moving on down into the Donetsk region and start covering the remainder of the news for the night. Starting off in Orlivka, today we've seen that the 59th Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces has hit Russian entrenched positions near Orlivka. Here's the video of them hitting this BMP. Of course, it's got copyrighted music. We can see the artillery coming in, and it looks like one just hit the BMP dead on. Ooh, that's gotta hurt. And with that, that's the end of the video, but we have seen that the 59th Brigade, let me make sure I got, 59th Brigade has destroyed a BMP near Orlivka. So once again, pretty decent news. It's not a major loss, but it is still a loss, and every loss should be celebrated as there's one less Russian vehicle that can be used in Ukraine. We're now going to start moving down towards the Donetsk area in particular, and we can see near Avdiivka today that there was some combat footage that came out from the pro-Russian forces. Apparently, these are Pyatnashka fighters. Apparently, there's some kind of a DPR or pro-Russian force fighter, and we can see them here shouldering an RPG-7 and preparing to fire it at the Ukrainians. We can now hear some fire. It appears that it's fire from their side, and we don't hear any return fire as of the moment. We can now see them traversing a trench. And we can now hear a little bit of return fire as we hear some bullets snapping off the ground. You hear a bullet snap off of the ground right in front of this Russian. So we do know that they're in a firefight. Apparently it's a very sparse one. We now see these Russian forces moving through a wooded forest, and that is the end of the video. We don't really have a lot of information as to how that firefight unfolded, but we did see that there was actual firefights unfolding near Avdiivka in between the Russians and the Ukrainians, which is something new. We haven't seen that kind of footage in a while. Moving further back behind the lines near the town of Makiivka, we've seen today that there was some kind of shelling that occurred within the city. We're not sure if this was a Russian shelling, because we've actually seen a couple of those over the course of time, or whether this was a Ukrainian shelling. I'm honestly leaning more towards this may have been a Ukrainian shelling. But anyways, here's the footage. We now see the MLRS fire coming in all around. And hitting right near that truck. We don't know if the trucker is alright or not. And that's the end of the video, but we could clearly see that some kind of an MLRS barrage was levied against Makiivka. I think it may have been a Ukrainian one trying to hit some kind of a military target there, although I can't really be certain for sure. All we know is that there was an MLRS attack in Makiivka today. With that, we're now going to be moving on down into Donetsk, where we've seen that the DPR has sentenced the 2 British men that were mentioned on Russian television yesterday to death. The Supreme Court of the Donetsk People's Republic sentenced foreigners who fought on the side of Ukraine to death. These 2 were British volunteers. Their names were Aidan Aslan and Sean Penner. And apparently there was a Moroccan included as well, Sadoun Brahim, who has also been sentenced to death as well. The Ukrainians have not sentenced a single Russian war criminal to death over the course of this war. All of the Russians that have been indicted and sentenced because of their crimes have only been sentenced to life in prison. But we can see that that kind of mercy is not extended to the Ukrainians that are captured by the DPR or the LPR as they sentence these so-called war criminals, or whatever they'd like to call them. I don't even know what they're calling them, but they're subjecting them to a penalty of death, which is honestly very sick when you consider that the Ukrainians have never done that to a single one of their soldiers, but the DPR would be sick enough to put these men to death. Anyways, here's the video.
Признать виновным в совершении преступлений, предусмотренных статьями 232, часть 2 статьи 34, статьи 323, части 2 статьи 34, части 3 статьи 430 УК Донецкой Народной Республики и назначить наказание. По статье 232 УК Донецкой Народной Республики введение сроком на 17 лет без ограничения свободы. По части 2 статьи 34 статьи части 3 статьи 430 УК Донецкой Народной Республики решение свободы сроком на 7 лет без ограничения свободы. По части 2 статьи 34 статьи 323 УК Донецкой Народной Республики исключительные меры наказания, смертную казнь. На основании статьи части 3 статьи 68 УК Донецкой Народной Республики по совокупности преступлений окончательно назначить Асину Эйдану Данилу Джону Марку исключительные меры наказания, смертную казнь. Пена Рашуна признать виновным в совершении преступлений, предусмотренных статьей 232, часть 2 статьи 34, статьи 323, части 2 статьи 34, части 3 статьи 430 Донецкой Народной Республики и назначить наказание по статье 232 УК Донецкой Народной Республики в виде лишения свободы сроком на 17 лет без ограничения свободы. По части 2 статьи 34, часть 3 статьи 430 УК Донецкой Народной Республики в виде лишения свободы сроком на 7 лет без ограничения свободы. По части 2 статьи 34, части 3 статьи 323 УК Донецкой Народной Республики исключительное меры наказания смертную казнь. На основании статьи части 368 УК Донецкой Народной Республики по совокупности преступлений окончательно назначить виновному исключительное меры наказания смертную казнь. Садуна Ибрагимова признать виновным в совершении преступлений, предусмотренных статьей 232, часть 2 статьи 34, статьи 323, часть 2 статьи 34, часть 3 статьи 430 УК Донецкой Народной Республики и назначить наказание по статье 232 УК Донецкой Народной Республики в виде лишения свободы сроком на 17 лет без ограничения свободы. По части 2 статьи 34, части 3 статьи 430 УК Донецкой Народной Республики в виде лишения свободы сроком на 7 лет без ограничения свободы. По части 2 статьи 34, части 3 статьи 323 УК Донецкой Народной Республики исключительные меры наказания смертной казни. На основании части 3 статьи 68 УК Донецкой Народной Республики по совокупности преступлений окончательно наказать Садуну Ибрагимову исключительные меры наказания в виде смертной казни. Приговор может быть обжалован участниками процесса в процессуальном порядке Верховного суда Донецкой Народной Республики через апелляционную палату в течение 1 месяца с дня его провозглашения, а осужденным.
And so we're going to cut it there because, of course, it doesn't have a speech-to-text translation, but we just saw this DPR court sentence these 3 men to death for fighting for Ukraine. Now, a lot of y'all are saying, and I've seen it in the live chat, that this is a political maneuver, and it is. This is trying to get back at the British by executing a couple of their citizens. These guys, of course, we've heard about them a little bit here on the channel. They have dual citizenship, so they were actually Ukrainians before the war, and they were also British as well, but they did serve in the armed forces of Ukraine during this conflict, and a little bit before it, if I believe my information is correct. So it's honestly sickening to think that these guys, just because they have British citizenship, are being subjected to death, along with the Moroccan man who, as far as I know, really has no involvement in this whole entire thing, rather than he's Moroccan. And I don't know what the DPR's qualm is against the Moroccans, but still a sickening affair. I hope that they do not get executed, but it seems like they most likely will be at this point. And if they are, I feel like the British should get involved much faster in this war, and start providing even more arms and aid, considering that now the DPR is trying to select out anyone with British citizenship that they can get their hands on and try and have them executed for it. So with that, we're now going to be moving out of the the city of Donetsk, and we're now going to move back towards the front lines near Marinka, where you can see that the Ukrainians try to get vengeance for their volunteers behind the lines that are now being subjected to death, and we can see that they did destroy a couple of vehicles near Marinka today. So here's a video of that. And of course, I've got to mute the music. But we can see here in this open field, we can see a tank firing and apparently hitting somewhere near the tree line. We can now see some kind of a black mass there. I'm assuming it may be a vehicle. If it gets hit by artillery and explodes, we'll have a pretty good idea it's a vehicle. Come on. We want to see it get hit. I'm assuming that's the vehicle. Oh, so close. They're getting closer. That shot was incredibly close. We can now see the smoke dissipating from that shot. Now, they say the third time's the charm. Third time looks like it may have been the charm. Let's wait and see, though. It looks like a little bit of smoke is coming off the vehicle, so it may have been hit directly enough that it did cause damage. And it did. The vehicle was hit. Third time was the charm, and we can see that the tank is now brewing up right in front of one of those crappily dug Russian trenches, literally in a straight line. I gotta tell you, I don't know why, but the Russians are some kind of idiots or something. To dig a trench in a straight line is suicide, yet they continuously do it. We've never seen them change up that strategy. We still see the tank burning. Looks like it's been burning quite thoroughly, actually. Oh, wait a minute, that's the video. That's the high vault right there. That's the tank that was going for the record. Let's take a look at that. Oh yeah, that's it. The turret comes out of the fire. Yeah, there it was. There's the turret. That's the exact same video we saw earlier in the Location Unknowns, where the tank was trying to go for the new highest turret record. We can see here that once again it's going for it, and now we have a little bit of a backstory as to where this happened and why that tank exploded. And it exploded because of an artillery strike. Third time's the charm, and it looks like that third time may secure Russia as the world record holder here in the Olympics for the tank throwing championship. With that, that is the end of the video, but it's always great to see that the Russian Olympic team will be holding the gold medal in their next line of competitions. I'm trying to sound like that British commentator on FIFA if any of y'all played that game. But anyways, very interesting to see, and it's great to know that the Ukrainians are inflicting casualties on the Russians still in the Donetsk region, although neither side has managed to make any progress. We're now going to be bypassing the Mariupol area. There has been no news to speak of there. And we're now going to be moving further down the front line towards the Zaporizhia area near the village of Polohi. Here near the front lines today, we've seen Azov medics in action, helping out wounded Ukrainian soldiers that have been injured in an artillery barrage. Of course, the Ukrainians have incredibly high morale, and they've had it time and time again, but even with high morale, sometimes high morale cannot save you from artillery and shrapnel. And so these soldiers were hit by shrapnel, but we can see that the quick work of these medics here did help to save their lives, and hopefully they can get the medical care they need further on behind the lines.
Давай, давай, брат, разговаривай. Да все нормально, все нормально. Разговаривай. Давай я тебя подтяну чуть-чуть выше, братуха. Давай. Так что? 19:50, да? Сваток, разговаривай. Ромал, ты? Я, брат. Разговаривай, братан, что? Ирпенский, родной, давай, блядь. Ты мне нахуй не отъезжай, понял? А то я тебе ебал набью нахуй в Ирпене, понял? Осколок. Это жесть. Осколок в спину.
Так, блядь, я ж туда руку совал, не было крови.
Да нахуй туда руку совал, тебе рука чиста?
Ну, проверить себя.
Проверить себя, и я проверю.
Конечно, болит тебе, блядь, сколок торчит там. Нормально. Он не засовывает, он просто наклеит.
Ну все, заебись.
Сука, дизель, блядь, контужений, да? Масяня, перевір, чи в нього абсолютно нічого біля себе нема.
Видишь, ну я бы тебе побеспокоился, блядь.
Ну то щоб ти футбол бігав. Зараз, ще чуть-чуть потерпи, ми попустимо, стане
Еще
легше.
в футбол поиграем, блядь.
Холодно, никому не холодно.
Блядь, пацани, будете писати рапорт, щоб вам нові штани давали.
Конечно.
Блядь,
Возьми его нахуй.
тот фонарь, блядь.
Зараз, братан, птичка улетить. Я попущу тобі турнікет і затампоную. Там артерія не зачіплена, ти не
You can see that the video is going dark for a second. We're going to fast forward.
Скоро вернемось.
We're going to fast forward a little bit more. We now see the lights come back on, and it appears that they're taking the tourniquet off of this man's leg. We can also see some kind of a hole in his leg. It may be from a bullet wound. Now, that's something that does surprise a lot of people that, interestingly enough, because I have seen enough pictures of bullet wounds at this point to get a good picture about it, entry wounds are actually very small. And it's very interesting, actually, that they're that small. Usually you would think that once they hit the skin, it would just blast it open. But actually, it's almost like a pin-sized hole. It's almost like someone got stabbed with a spear or an arrow. And so it's really interesting to me that when you actually see wounds caused by bullets, while they will pass all the way through the body and do cause a decent amount of damage, the holes they create are very small. And so that if that is a bullet wound, that is a good example of one. But you see them still joking around even while the guy's wounded.
Ні, тут чисто.
Ебали танк, пацаны!
Вот ты, ебать, он там обиделся на вас.
Уже поехал. Масяня.
We now see them lifting the wounded man out, and they'll see they're trying to load him onto some kind of truck to get him out of there.
Откуда? Самого Киева?
Брат,
Киева.
я сейчас посуну ногу.
Да.
Запиши, в какую больницу.
А. Ты на Киевске, да?
And that's the end of the video, but you could see the great work of the Azov medics, the Azov medics. I was about to say Azovstal, and I was like, what is it, Azovstal or Azov? The Azov medics did an incredibly good job there attending to that man's wounds and trying to get him the help he needs as fast as possible. Of course, speed is as important in medical care as it is in every other aspect of the battlefield. And we can see there that they are working as fast as they can to make sure that as few soldiers get even worse off or die in the process of getting help. So with that, of course, it's great to see that the Azov medics are working incredibly hard in that regard, and we're now going to start moving towards the Kherson area. We have gotten no news from the front lines in any direction rather than here today, and we have also gotten no news of the counterattacks up here in the northern area, which leads me to believe that they may have stalled. That's, of course, based off of no news coming out of there, and of course, if progress was being made, the Ukrainians would notify us, and the Russians, if they were making progress, they would also put out videos as well. But we haven't seen videos come out from either side, which lets us know that apparently this front line has fallen static. But in the area of Kherson, we have seen a little bit of progress as the 28th has been striking Russian positions and apparently incurring a decent amount of losses. Well, actually, a decent amount of kills would be the more appropriate term. And so, here's the first video. Here we can see a Russian vehicle hidden in some kind of a large dugout. We can also see another Russian vehicle in a dugout. And we can see that they have multiples of these. We can see that there's a main battle tank in there. It appears to be some kind of a T-72. And we can actually see that these little dugouts continue on all the way down the length of the road. Over and over. Different kinds of vehicles. But generally the same kind of dugout. We can now see the artillery coming down right on top of these vehicles and destroying them one by one. It didn't matter how much effort the Russians put into these dugouts. A large piece of plywood topped with some dirt is not really going to stop it from being destroyed in an artillery barrage. We now see another artillery shell hit a Russian position on the other side of the road. And we see as the camera pans out, this small little slice of hell is now the Russians for free. So I hope that the Ukrainians, of course, don't charge them too much rent on it. I'm sure that the Russians will enjoy what they've been given here. And so with that, we're now going to move to our next video, which is also from the 28th Brigade as well, which is very interesting to see that the 28th Brigade has pretty much been carrying the action on this front line as of today, where we can see that they hit the Russians once again in a different location. Here we can see these fields out in the distance, and we can see some Russian vehicles out there in the field. It appears that they may be some kind of an SPG, considering that they were firing upwards into the air. And we can now see that this drone is starting to coordinate the artillery fire. We can see that it appears to be some kind of a small fire base, actually, filled with peons, or Malkas. And we can now see that one of them has been hit nearly dead on by an artillery shell. We can now see that that vehicle is burning. And it looks like it's starting to burn pretty quickly. We now see some smaller, minor explosions, which may be caused by the ammo explosions on the SPG. And we can now see some while later, it looks like the fire base has largely fallen silent. We don't really see a lot of anything happening. But we can once again see that this SPG here in the corner is being highlighted, which tells us that something is about to happen to it. We see another small explosion coming from the artillery near the vehicle. And now we can see it on fire again. It looks like this vehicle just loves to toast. As they say, toasty roasty, and that one's definitely toasting. We see it's caught on fire for a third time. And we still see some smoke coming up from some of the newer artillery explosions. And we see a little bit of fire over there near that other peon. That thing, it finally explodes. So we finally got that after it caught on fire for about 4 or 5 times. The thing finally exploded and got put out of its misery. I don't know what that's saying, sadly, but we can see more artillery coming in, and this time some of the shells landed directly on even more SPGs within this small little fire base that they set up in this field. Based off of nothing moving in that fire base, I'm going to assume that the Russians abandoned it as soon as the first shells came in, because we didn't see any of the vehicles move or attempt to move. And so, with that, we can see that the Ukrainians appear to have destroyed at least 2 SPGs and may have damaged several others, but we can't confirm damage on film, but we can confirm destruction, and we know that 2 of them were destroyed. And so with that, of course, it's great to see that the Ukrainian artillery from the 28th Brigade has done a massive amount of work today, attacking the Russian dugouts along the road, and also this fire base in the middle of these fields. And I also, once again, have to note that the Ukrainian countryside is very pretty, although it's incredibly flat. So with that, we have, of course, gotten no frontline developments from the Kherson area. Of course, there's been a lack of news from the northern finger, and we've also gotten no news around the Kherson area itself. And so, as of right now, while we have seen the 28th Brigade inflicting heavy losses on the Russians, we don't have any idea of how well an advance has been conducted, if there even was one today. With that, we're now going to be moving out of the southern front and towards Lviv, where today we've seen Ukrainians compare a Polish T-72 to a Mercedes. In their words, it's a Mercedes, not a Lada. So here's the video of the Ukrainians operating a Polish T-72. I'm just going to let this thing run and let y'all see it for yourselves.
Яку надають Україні союзники, підсилює спроможності наших хлопців. І що там казати, показує свою ефективність.
Це той самий польський Т-72Б3, одна з багатьох машин, на які дуже чекали на фронті. І ось вони тут, доукомплектовані, допрацьовані, чекають на команду вперед.
Машини добре заховані. Навіть зблизька я не одразу побачив потужну броню серед зелені.
Танкісти не носять бронежилетів. Зрозуміло чому. Тут простору мало, так само мало, як і в українському танку. Нічого нового для наших хлопців. Єдине, що написи на приладах польською, але я думаю, що для хлопців не складає проблеми зрозуміти, про що йдеться.
Шлях польських танків від кордону до передової був доволі довгим. Чому? Це не є секретом. Адже навіть пересічний автомобіліст знає, будь-яка техніка після тривалого зберігання потребує заміни багатьох деталей. І танк в цьому плані нічим не відрізняється від легкової автівки.
Коли довго стоять на зберіганні, вони просто-напросто виходять з ладу в тому плані, що резина є резина. Вона лопається, вона не видержує.
Але в броньованого поляка є свої переваги.
Пане Петро, от танк цей, він кращий від тих танків, які були на озброєнні української армії? Чим він кращий?
Ходові качества, мощніший двигатель набагато. Тепловізор є. Нічний тепловізор, який в 64-ки практично немає.
Це означає, що на відміну від старих машин, польська 72-ка може вдало воювати вночі.
То як зрівнити Мерседес з Жигулями. Жигулі стоять, оце Мерседес.
Та попри всі переваги, польський Т-72 – це танк радянського зразку. Українська армія рухалась вперед, Захід повинен давати більше нового озброєння. В кілька разів більше. Андрій Цаплієнко, Руслан Ганущак, Сергій Семенюк, Миколаїв, ТСН, Марафон, Єдині новини.
And with that, that's the end of the video, but we could see them there taking a pretty good look at this Polish T-72, and hopefully it can be used well in the front lines. In my opinion, it does appear to be an older tank. While, of course, it's great that the Polish did provide these to the Ukrainians, it appears to be some kind of a T-72B that's had some slight upgrades. But with that, we have now covered all of the news across all of the country for today. And so now we're going to go to Kyiv, where we can hear the speech, as it's become tradition on this channel to hear the speech every single night from the president of Ukraine. And so here's the speech from President Zelensky here on day 106 of the news.
Українці, українки, всі наші захисники і захисниці. Нещодавно завершив розмову з президентом Франції Еммануелем Макроном. Говорили передусім про оборонну підтримку. Звісно, це ключова тема. Поінформував Еммануеля про ситуацію на передовій, про можливий розвиток протистояння найближчими днями і тижнями, про наміри російських окупантів і про нашу протидію. Звичайно, детально говорили про європейську перспективу України. Готуємось до відповіді на нашу заявку щодо кандидатства. Торкнулися також тематики гарантій безпеки для України і для усієї Європи. Вдячний, що ми з президентом Франції обговорили цю тему, продовжуємо працювати. Говорив сьогодні із прем'єр-міністром Чорногорії про шлях наших країн до Європейського Союзу. Фактично обмінялися досвідом. Продовжуємо дуже активно працювати в усіх країнах Європейського Союзу щоденно, щоб там однаково сприймалася ситуація щодо кандидатства для нашої держави. І на Заході, і на Сході, і на півночі, і на півдні Європейського Союзу. Більшість європейців підтримують інтеграцію України. А якщо європейці підтримують, то політики, які поки що сумніваються в деяких країнах, не мають протиставляти себе людям, суспільству і самому ходу європейської історії. Звернувся до учасників міністерської зустрічі Організації економічного співробітництва і розвитку. Це одна з найбільш впливових міжнародних організацій світу. Зв'язки з Росією вони розірвали. Але потрібні також і сутнісні рішення. Потрібен конкретний тиск на Росію за те, що вона робить, зокрема і за спровоковану нею кризу на світовому ринку продовольства. Провів сьогодні дуже важливу нараду з урядовцями. Економіка, бізнес, робочі місця. Обговорили дії на 3 рівнях. Те, що потрібно зробити вже зараз, те, що можемо зробити найближчим часом, як би складно не було, і те, що обов'язково зробимо після війни. Перше – це програма спеціальних грантів для підтримки малого і середнього бізнесів. Те, що вже зараз можемо забезпечувати нові робочі місця і нову податкову базу. Друге – це розвиток нашого сектору безпеки в усіх його аспектах. І зараз, і в подальшому. Це також питання про робочі місця, питання про фаховість, про технологічність. Сектор безпеки в Україні має стати зовсім іншим, ніж це було всі ці 30 років. Від державного кордону і до кожної вулиці, до кожної школи, до кожного об'єкту інфраструктури безпека має бути на 100%. І третій аспект – це промислове відновлення та залучення інвестицій в державу. Локалізація, індустріальні парки, підтримка державного замовлення, залучення сучасних технологій в Україну. Готуються відповідні державні програми. Зараз в Україні багато дискусій про те, якою має бути економічна політика держави і у час війни, і тоді, коли повернемо мир. Хочу підкреслити одну деталь. І ця деталь фундаментальна. Ми вже маємо звикати до того, що в суспільстві можуть бути тільки 2 частини. Ті, хто захищає нашу незалежність, і ті, хто працює так, щоб забезпечити цей захист. І це не питання тієї чи іншої економічної доктрини, не питання тієї чи іншої політичної позиції. Ми просто не можемо собі дозволити, щоб в країні залишалась тіньова частина економічного життя. Звичайно, я розумію, що в частині наших регіонів зараз будь-яка економічна активність, офіційна чи неофіційна, є питанням просто виживання. Але якщо ми говоримо про нормальне, стабільне, міцне життя суспільства, роботу держави, про нашу оборону, то маємо розуміти, є ті, хто служить, є ті, хто забезпечує своєю роботою тих, хто служить. Отже, це офіційна зайнятість, це сплата податків, це максимальне розширення економічних можливостей в нашій країні на легальному ґрунті. І це повна модернізація державних інституцій. Всі, хто працює в українській політиці, хто впливає на суспільну дискусію, мають усвідомити, що тіньового в країні більше не буде. Вдячний нашим зв'язківцям, які сьогодні буквально за день відновили в Харкові телевізійне мовлення після ранкового обстрілу. Бити по телецентрах, руйнувати канали зв'язку, залишити людей в ізоляції. Це тактика. Тактика окупанта, без якої вони дійсно не можуть, бо відкритість Чесність також є зброєю проти усього, що несе Росія. Фронтова ситуація за добу без суттєвих змін. Северодонецьк, Лисичанськ, інші міста Донбасу, які окупанти вважають зараз ключовими мішенями, тримаються. Маємо певний позитив в Запорізькій області, де вдається зривати плани окупантів. Поступово просуваємось вперед на Харківщині, звільняючи нашу землю. Тримаємо оборону на Миколаївському напрямку. Я вдячний усім нашим захисникам, усім захисницям, завдяки яким це можливо, завдяки яким ми витримали вже 106 днів повномасштабної війни. Вічна слава усім, хто став на захист нашої держави, вічна пам'ять усім, хто загинув за Україну. Слава Україні!
And with that, that was the end of President Zelensky's speech here on day 106. Of course, he had a lot of interesting things to say, which he has every single day. I have to say, he's actually a very good speaker. He comes up with pretty decent speeches and summaries of what's happened over the day, and he does it a little bit quicker than me, and so I have to give him a lot of credit for that. And so, with that in mind, we have reached the end of this question segment. Well, not question segment, sorry, correction there. News segment for the night. If you were here for the news alone, and if you are a new viewer, make sure to subscribe. We do upload these streams every single night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, and we also do daily summaries, which are being uploaded a few hours, like around 4 or 5 hours before the stream, and we're thinking about pushing that back to its normal time again, just because. But with that in mind, we're now about to move on to the question segment and answer as many questions as we can throughout the rest of the night. And so, if you were here for the news alone, just letting you know, we are about to move into the question segment. And for everyone else, welcome to the question segment. And so with that, what is our first question of this segment, Matthew?
All right, and before we move to our Super Chat questions, we do have a viewer who believes he has figured out the Morse code, and this is from Mike D, who says, Enforcer, how are my decoding skills? I think the Morse code said, remember to drink your Ovaltine.
Close, but not quite. It's actually, I'm actually trying to still get out the cipher for it. I actually worked with one of our viewers, who's on Discord about this Morse code, and he actually had a little cipher that was supposed to go with it, but I haven't put it out yet. Because I've been trying to make it as difficult as possible, else the Navy guys will get this thing done in 5 minutes. And that's what I'm trying to avoid, because the Navy guys are, like, suffocating this thing. Like, I tried one cipher, and someone already figured that thing out 30 minutes after I put it up. So this one's heavily encrypted. It does have a message in it, just letting everyone know again. It's not gibberish. It does have a message in it. It's a couple of words, but we broke up the words into separate segments. So each little block of, I guess you could say, letters is actually one word, but it's cut up into multiple pieces. It also has a cipher put onto it. And so if any of y'all can figure that out, I'm going to be really impressed. We're actually going to be trying to put out that cipher soon. I'm sorry that I haven't been able to, but it has been a little bit of a reprieve for me because I haven't been needing to work on a new Morse code message every day. So with that, close, but I think you need to still keep on trying. It's a little off. But with that, we're now going to move on to the questions, and good shot at trying.
And first up from the Super Chats, we have a $20 donation from Demonix, who says, keep up the good work. I want to make a guess to what you look like according to your voices. Enforcer, you're a little bit tall, maybe 6'2", a little lanky with a mustache. And Matt, you're rocking a beard. Am I right?
You were very
well...
with Matthew, not quite. With me, you were very close. I actually have a goatee. I am 6'2". You got that dead on. And I'm not lanky. I'm actually in between big and thin, so I'm kind of like in that middle range. So I hope that kind of addresses that a little bit. And so with that in mind, I thank you very much for the support. You are super close, actually. There is one viewer out there, but they've sworn to secrecy. They know what I look like because they actually saw me in person. I have been thinking, once again, it's kind of entered my mind again, about doing a face reveal, because I was thinking about a little bit of my security, because I've actually gotten a lot of notifications from people over Discord that they have managed to find certain things online that are me. And it turns out that they have been right so far. And so I've been thinking, since if the Russians wanted to actually know what I looked like, or if anyone wanted to kill me, they could already have found out. What's the harm in doing a full-on face reveal anyways, and showing y'all what I look like and who I am. I've been thinking about that still, thinking about doing it, because if someone actually wanted to do me harm and find out what I looked like to further that goal, they probably already know. So it most likely will be coming soon. I don't know when. I can't give any guarantees, but it may just be a standalone video, not included in anything else, that kind of just shows who I am. You know, of course, I'll be in the whole Enforcer kit. And then after that, of course, that's going to open up things for me to do that I've been wanting to do. Like, I kind of want to tell y'all whenever I'm going around to reenactments, be like, hey, y'all, I'm going to so-and-so reenactment at such and such place. If you want to meet me in person, come here. I will be there. I've been wanting to do that because I will be going to an event here in a couple of weeks. And one of my the viewer that saw me in person is actually coming to that one. So I can't wait to see them again. It was super cool to meet them in person. And I've been wanting to do something like that. But to do that, y'all would see my face there, and so I might as well just show my face on here. And then someone said, LOL, the Russians going to kill you. No, the Russians aren't going to kill me. I'm scared of lunatics, okay? Because I'm just going to be frankly honest here. There's a lot of crazy people out in the world, and we have gotten death threats here on this channel already. And so it's not something that's just a farce. There are nuts out there that will try and kill you for what you say. So with that, I hope that kind of addresses that there may be a potential face reveal in the future. I know that a lot of people right now are saying I shouldn't or should, but you know, honestly, I don't like. Honestly, I could care less about crazies. If the crazies want to come at me, then they can. I'm almost always close to some kind of level of protection, and so I don't really feel like it'd be too much of a worry, especially if I'm around the reenacting group, because the reenacting groups are like a ride or die kind of thing. So if anyone tried to come up and cause me harm, there would be about 4 other people right there who would be fighting them off of me along with me. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next question, but I do thank you so much for the support, and you were super close, actually. I look very similar to that. And with that, we are on to the next question.
And next up, we have another viewer that wants to take a crack at the Morse code. This time it is from Diffuse56, who is a channel legend. He's been around forever. He says, okay, I have it decoded. The latrine is around the corner of the trenches. Please bury your poop. Don't leave it unburied.
Really close again. I mean, like, y'all are getting really close with this stuff, but not quite. I will give y'all a hint. It's not any sort of cryptic message about Ukraine. It's actually more about the channel, because we were trying to test out this new form of cipher. And what's kind of sad is that once we use the cipher, we're probably never going to use it again, because then people will know how to break it. But very close again, Diffuse, but not quite. As we said in that one video, close but no cigar. So I hate to say that, but I do thank you very much for the support, Diffuse. You've been around forever, and I hope that a lot of people are having fun trying to decode that thing, although it may have gotten really difficult at this point from what I can tell. But with that, thank you once again, and we're going to be moving on to the next question. Also, real quick, Eddie, no, I do not have protection for the CIA. I just want everyone to know again, because this channel has gotten large, and I'm not going to lie, it's around 73.5 thousand subscribers right now, I think. And so a lot of people are starting to come in here and think that I've just been always at this level or something, and the answer is, I literally started off this stream as a gaming channel. You can go all the way back to the very first stream and see that it had gaming channel roots. And so I'm not actually funded or anything like that from any type of outside organization. Literally, the people who fund this channel are the viewers. That's why I take in super chats for that specific reason. And also that allows me to do what I like. And if people support it, then they can support it. And I'm not at all bound to anyone's external wishes, like some sponsor or some kind of group, and they pay me money and then they tell me you can only say this. I don't like that. I will say what I want, and you know, if people like that, they can support it, and if they don't have to. That's why there's no ads being run on this stuff, and also ads are annoying. So I hope that answers that question, and with that, we're on to the next one.
And next up, we have the return of another channel super legend. Trademarks and patents for growing businesses. He puts in a $30 donation and says, thank you guys. What's the geography of the peninsula, having Vasilivka and the national park on its tip, south of Kharkiv and northwest of Crimea? It's shown at times as Russia occupied and sometimes not. Future landing spot for Ukraine? ?
Give me the geography of this location again.
It's the peninsula having Vasilivka and the national park on its tip, south of Kharkiv and northwest of Crimea.
South of Kharkiv and northwest of Crimea. There's a lot of stuff in between Kharkiv and Crimea. That's pretty much the entirety of the front line that's in between that area. But let's see if I can try and figure that out. Peninsula, National Park, Vasilivka. Do not see Vasilivka here. National Park, Vasilivka. I do not see Vasilivka there. National Park, Vasilivka. I do not see Vasilivka here. And those are the only coastlines I can imagine. There's park on the tip. There's one over here, but this is really Russian controlled. I just don't ever change this front line. Wait, did you say Ivanivka?
Vasilivka.
Vasilivka. Oh, wait a minute, it's right here. Yeah, this is it. Vasilivka. He's talking about this one. It's not really over here. Hopefully I've got the right one. But this is actually controlled by the Russians by and large. And of course, the Ukrainians don't have a navy large enough to conduct any kind of meaningful landing force or supply it well. And so I don't think that would be a possibility just due to that reason alone. If you don't have a navy, naval invasions are practically impossible. So with that, I hope that does answer the question. And I thank you very much for the support. It does help out our channel a huge deal. And I hope I answered that question in brief, but that is just the going thing by and large. If anyone says naval invasion on this channel, my answer is Ukraine doesn't even have a navy to conduct one and supply it, sadly. But with that, thank you once again. I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $20 donation from Sweaty Chungus, who says, here's 20 for the deadly in case things get squiggly.
Well, thank you very much, Sweaty Chungus, for the diddly in case things get squiggly. Of course, things are always getting close to being squiggly around here, and so we always need diddly just in case the stuff does get squiggly. And so we'll make sure to keep that in mind and also keep that in a little safe to the side, so that way if things do get squiggly, we can whip that thing out and use it. So thank you very much once again for the support, Sweaty Chungus, and also the funny little joke you threw in there, because I actually got a good little chuckle out of it. And so with that, thank you once again, and we're going to be moving on to the next question.
And moving on, we have a $20 donation from Richard Bray. He doesn't leave a comment, but thank you very much, Richard, for your support. And up next, we have a $20 donation from Big Cheese, who says, hey, to invest in pork bellies.
Hey, well, I mean, like, I thank you very much for the support. I don't know what that's specifically talking about, but I would agree with that as well. Now, one thing I've got to say is, speaking of investing, because whenever I hear invest, you know, like I have like PTSD, it freaks me out. But I just want to tell everyone, if you ever see anything in the comments section, because I've seen this thing running around, it looks kind of like a scam. Someone will comment in my comments section, hey guys, have y'all ever invested in crypto? And then there's like 10 accounts, they're all the same each time, that will respond to this one account. Like, yeah, crypto's so good, you've helped me out so much. And don't fall for that. I think it's some kind of scam, so just watch out for that. And if you see it in my comments section, we try and delete them and whenever I look through the comments, but just know that's a scam. If you also see me in the comments section asking for y'all to support me through PayPal or Cash App, do not listen to that either. That's a fake account trying to fish y'all. So just letting y'all know in advance, because every time I hear invest, it throws me into flashbacks about all the times I've been worried that people may have been scammed by something fake in the comments section on the channel. And so with that, I thank you very much for the support. I would invest in pig guts. Just because I think they could be used. And so with that, thank you once again for the support, and we are on to the next question, but thank you once again.
And moving on, we have a $20 donation from another channel regular, Bass Girl, who says, I'm concerned on how Russia is slowly taking more territory. Russia has a larger military, and how will Ukraine replenish their military personnel? Thank you for your humbleness. You and Matt are honorable young men.
Well, thank you so much for the support, Bass Girl. And to answer that question, the Ukrainians have been losing ground, but I do have to say that the amount of ground that they lose is World War I equivalents to minor victories, which isn't a large amount of ground. The other thing is that the Ukrainians are losing forces. We've heard now, I haven't been able to confirm this, but someone did say that the Ukrainians were losing around 100 to 200 men a day killed, I believe. And that's, of course, getting almost equivalent to the Russian figures at that point, if that is true. So going off of that, I'm not really sure how they will replenish their numbers. Of course, general mobilization has been called, and so they could just, of course, start walking around and grabbing up men off the streets and saying, you get a rifle, and you get a rifle, and you get a rifle, and all of y'all are going to the front after a little bit of training. They could start doing that, and we know that they're already doing that. I think they have something like a... I'm not really sure. I can't really get into the numbers, but we do know that they have new groups of soldiers in training that will be sent into this war to the front lines eventually. So they're already working on trying to get replacements up to the front lines, replenishments, I guess you could say, to make sure that their force stays the same rate and doesn't start to suffer from the attrition that one does face near a front. And so I think that that's the larger answer to how they're fixing their manpower issues that they will eventually be facing, is that they're already starting to train new soldiers to get ready to head to the front. And so with that, I hope I did answer that question, Bass Girl, to the best of my abilities, and I thank you so much for the support. You've been around for an incredibly long time, and you've been a long-time channel supporter, and of course, I'm always very appreciative to everyone who helps out this channel and also supports us pretty much nightly, like you do, Bass Girl. So thank you once again. I hope I did answer that question pretty well, and with that, we're on to the next one.
And moving on to the next one, we have a $20 donation from Freedom First, another channel regular, who says, hello and great job. What do you think about Nicaragua allowing Russian inside their country? Also, can we please get a translator who can translate the videos? Maybe she can also read lips when we have to mute for CRM. Thank you.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. To answer the thing about the translators, I unfortunately cannot get a translator. The thing is that it causes problems with my schedule, and it's very hard to do that because if someone's on a call, they're talking, you know, like before the stream, and I have to have almost absolute silence to be able to work as fast as possible to try and get all this news put together. And so I can't really be distracted trying to talk to someone else during that time. And so I wouldn't be able to talk to a translator before the stream, and then I'd have to bring them on, and they'd be incredibly bored because most of the time they'd be sitting around not doing much, and then they'd be called upon maybe twice or 3 times during the stream to translate something. I don't want someone sitting around doing that. So sadly, I think that's just going to be an inconvenience. Everyone's going to have to bear with them. Sorry about that, but there's really nothing I can do to fix that, and you know, of course, keep the streams going the way they are. To answer the question though about Nicaragua, I'm very concerned about that, just in the aspect of Russian soldiers being in the North American continent. I don't really think much could come out of it, but that's still something I don't think we should be allowing. Of course, there is the extremely old, it's nearly ancient Monroe Doctrine, which says that interference from foreign powers on the North American continent can lead us to directly intervene, and of course go to war with them as well in defense of the continent, which is something that we've pulled out a couple of times before. One of the most notable examples was when John F. Kennedy cited the Monroe Doctrine during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And of course, it can be pulled out again. It really has no legal standing. It's just something that President Monroe declared during his presidency around 1817 or so. And so, actually, let me make sure I got that correct. Madison Monroe. Nope, I got that wrong. President, we'll just type in President Monroe because I forgot his first name. President Monroe. James Monroe. Okay. James Monroe. From 1817 to 1825. I got it right. The Monroe Doctrine, I believe, was 1817. Let me type that in just to see if I got my trivia correct. The Monroe Doctrine. Wait a minute. Oh, it was in 1823, but he did become president in 1817. So I got the beginning of his presidency correct, but I didn't get the time that the Monroe Doctrine was actually published correct. So sorry about that, y'all. Sorry for the minor problem there. But still, something that's very interesting to me is that we have pulled that out before, and I think we could pull that out again. And while some people are saying that this is a distraction from the main issue, the United States could... I mean, like, this sounds very rude, and this sounds like a saber-rattling kind of thing. But if we have problems with the Nicaraguan government and they're trying to, of course, start swaying towards the Russian side, the U.S. government, well, the U.S. military could just roll into Nicaragua and overthrow the government. And, you know, well, this kind of sounds exactly like what the Russians are doing, but we could overthrow the government and install one that's, of course, leaning towards the American side and in our zone of interests to ensure that the Russians do not have a foothold in Nicaragua. But I hope that kind of answers the question, and I thank you very much for the support. And so with that being said, we're going to be moving on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from Ghost Wolf Declassified, who says February 24th, 2022 is a day that will live forever in infamy, like 9/11, Pearl Harbor, and the German invasion of Poland. It is surreal how much the geopolitical landscape has changed in just a few months. Glory to Ukraine.
And I agree, it really is something when you think about it, because in the early part of this year, in January, no one actually thought that this war would happen. Of course, there was a large amount of negotiations and tension around it, but everyone thought that this would subside with some kind of agreement, but it didn't. And so we've seen everything change, and of course, February 24th was one crazy night. And people have been saying for a while now, and remembering what they were doing on the 24th when this war began. Like I'm always saying, every once in a while, of course not always, but every once in a while, I'm always talking about I was playing Train Simulator when the first missile landed in Kyiv. And so I do have to agree that it's certainly been something to observe and, of course, change the political landscape around the entire world. The geopolitical one, I kind of call it diplomatic landscape because while it does fall into politics, it's really more of a diplomacy thing than politics itself. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I do have to agree it will go down in infamy, just like 9/11 or Pearl Harbor. And so with that, we are on to the next question, but I thank you so much for the support.
And up next, we have a $20 donation from Big Cheese, who says it was in reference to the Russian pig video.
Oh, well, thank you very much for clarifying. And yes, I would invest in the pig guts, because there definitely is a pig gut factory being made in Ukraine right now on those front lines. And so with that, I thank you very much once again for the support, and I thank you for clarifying that so that way I could kind of elaborate on it a little bit more, because I thought it may be about that video, but I kind of forgot about that one a little bit, so I was like, my memory on that one's a little foggy. But I do thank you very much for the support, and I thank you for clarifying what you meant. And with that, it's actually a pretty good joke too. So with that being said, well, thank you very much for the support. Sorry if I'm having a little bit of cramps here mentally, because coffee doesn't do what it used to do anymore. But with that being said, thank you very much for the support, and we're going to be moving on to the next question.
And moving on, we now have a $10 donation from Ole Walansky, who says, have you heard anything about Russian ship movements in the Black Sea, Don? Would the UN or NATO be able to implement a safe corridor made for grain shipments, Don? If Russia agrees to one, Don.
Well, Don, we don't know about the naval movements in the Black Sea, Don. We also don't know about the grain shipments, Don. Don, they say that the ships... Getting out of that, I hope you've enjoyed that for the small amount of time I'm going to do that, because it's annoying to me and it grates my nerves. But we haven't heard anything about the Western ships being allowed into Ukrainian ports to export the wheat. One thing that's really more important to talk about with the wheat is not how the West is going to get the wheat, but how the Middle East and Africa is going to get the wheat. Most of Ukraine's food production and its exports were being shipped to the Middle East and Africa, not Europe. So it's really more important to ask the question of how African and Middle Eastern ships are going to arrive in Ukrainian ports and get this wheat and then ship it out, or what they are going to do about the oncoming food situation that's going to be on them within months. So with that, I hope that does answer the question. We don't really know much about how that's going to happen. We know that the Russians did send out some kind of agreement. We're not really sure if it was fake or not, but they said that if the West lifted most, if not all, of the sanctions on Russia, they would open up the ports for ships to enter and, of course, grab grains and other materials. But, of course, no one accepted that because that's not an equivalent exchange. And so, as of right now, it appears that a blockade is still going on. We don't know where the Black Sea Fleet is exactly in the Black Sea. We know it's out there somewhere, but they are blockading Ukrainian ports and ensuring that Western ships, or any ships for that matter, cannot dock in a Ukrainian port and conduct business. So with that, I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question, at least in a way. And with that being said, we are on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from William Allen, another channel legend, who says, let them in Nicaragua. They've got to deal with the CCP that basically owned the Panama Channel since Carter gave it away. So it will be a threesome for the balance of power in Central America. Well, question mark.
Well, I would agree, but the thing is that if they wanted to do something about the Panama Canal, they would have to go to Panama. Not Nicaragua. The Panama Canal is, of course, in Panama, and we can actually see it here. And you can actually see what's interesting is that they actually didn't... Hey, speaking of Panama, pun intended, I just saw something in the live chat there. But getting back to the Panama Canal, what's very interesting about the canal is that they actually chose to dig it through the thinnest part of, I guess you could say, the isthmus here, and also they dug the canal into the Gatun Lake, which is really cool to me because they actually didn't have to do as much effort as, say, the Suez Canal. They just had to sit there and literally dig it to the lake on both sides, and this side is incredibly short. I mean, like, it's almost nothing if you look at it. But this side, though, it seems like it may have been a little bit more of a challenge. But still, they would have to go to Panama to do something like that, but instead they're in Nicaragua. Nicaragua really doesn't have much to offer, much like the other Central American countries. But still, it is a foothold in North America if the Russians were to be there. And, you know, obviously they're not going to start launching invasions through all of the Central American countries to make their way to America. But still, they could start inciting, I guess you could say, unrest in the surrounding countries, and then use these Russian forces as peacekeepers to then enter into other ones. That's kind of what I'm more concerned about, is that they could start to expand their sphere of influence here in these smaller Central American countries. Also, an interesting fact, did you know in the 1830s, and this is just something I knew, but in the 1830s, most of these little countries here had united, and they actually called themselves the United States of Central America. Of course, they disbanded after a very short while, but it was a very little interesting thing that there was a tiny United States of America made up of Central American countries. So I hope that tidbit was interesting. But with that, I hope I kind of touched on that a little bit. And of course, I thank you so much for the support, William Allen. While we agree on a lot of things, I think I'm going to have to agree to disagree there, because I don't think the Russians should have any kind of control or sphere of influence in the North American continent, because this is America's pretty much ground, and of course that would be an incursion on our kind of like our sphere, I guess you could say. And while you could say that we're doing that to the Russians, the thing is that we're a superpower and they're not, so that's kind of the difference in between the two. So with that, I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to be moving on to the next one.
And moving on to that super chat that the enforcer just mentioned a moment ago, we have a generous $100 donation from Panama, who says, Enforcer, what do you think that the Ukrainian forces can do more with their UAVs? Could they use more efficiently or more effectively?
Well, I thank you so much for the massive amount of support, Panama. Of course, it helps us out a massive deal, and I got to thank you so much for it, because without that kind of support, the channel can't keep running. And it's folks like you who keep the I guess you could say, gears turning here. And so thank you very much. Dan, to answer that question, I'm not really a drone expert, and drones are kind of in their infancy. But one thing I was thinking is that instead of using just one at a time, I'm not saying use a swarm. Now, that's something I actually did think about a little bit after I said that on stream before. And a massive swarm of them wouldn't really be too useful. It'd actually be quite wasteful, as a large amount of them would most likely get destroyed. But one thing I was thinking is maybe use 3 or 4 of them at the same time, load it down with bombs, all fly them to the same spot, and kind of just start carpet bombing the Russians. Of course, you can set these drones to be at slightly different altitudes, maybe about 50 feet above each other, and kind of like a staggered altitude set, and then just fly them over, so that way they're never going to run into each other because they're at slightly different altitudes, and then just hover them around and drop the bombs directly onto the Russian targets below. You can get 4 times the munitions dropped in the same area at the same amount of time that it would take just one, and hopefully you could inflict a little bit more damage doing something like that. Now, the question is, do they have enough drones to do something like that? And the answer to that might be no. So that might be out of the picture for them. But as far as I can tell right now, they're using drones to a great effect. Much better than the Russians have been using them. And much better than really anyone else has been able to use these kinds of smaller scale drones. So with that, I hope that does answer the question, at least in a way. I'm not like the go-to drone expert guy, especially about drone warfare, considering that it's so new, really anything could work. But I do think that the smaller drones with those kinds of munitions on them are the right way to go, and I think that will be the future of warfare, is using small drones like that are specifically purpose-made for those reasons. But with that, I thank you so much once again for the massive support, Panama. It helps us out a huge deal, and I can never tell you how thankful we really are. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support once again, and we're going to be moving on to the next question.
And just a heads up to everybody, we have about 15 super chats left. So up next, I want to recognize a $10 donation from Commander Prankster and a $10 donation from Miss K. So thank you very much to both of you for your support of the channel. You don't leave comments, but we appreciate the support. And moving on to our next one, we have a $10 donation from Mike D, who says, some good news. navalnews.com has an article that says the Russian aircraft carrier Admiral Kuznetsov, I'm not saying that correctly. There we go. Won't return to service before 2024.
That's correct. It's actually being refitted right now, and it's not like it really matters because that thing actually had a major history with fires, and it would have never been able to enter the Black Sea anyways because the Russians have been barred from passing through the Dardanelles or the Strait near Istanbul. I forgot the name of it. I actually don't know the name of it, being honest. But there's the Dardanelles, which is down here, and then there's the Strait up here, which I don't know the name of. But they're not allowed to pass through either of them. And so it wouldn't be able to make it to the Ukrainian front anyways, and even if it did, they probably wouldn't use the aircraft on board as much because we can already see that the Russian Air Force is very limited in its abilities on shore. But with that, I thank you so much for the support and sharing that little bit of information with us. It's of course always good to repeat, and it's good to know that the only Russian aircraft carrier cannot be used during this war. So with that, I thank you so much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And moving on, we have a $10 donation from Yuri Bench, who says, did you get to watch the excellent Ukrainian YouTuber Denis Davidov? And if so, what do you think of him?
Sadly, I hate to say this, but I haven't been able to watch him. I have to remind everyone again that while a lot of recommendations do come through, and I'm very happy to get them, I don't have a lot of time to really like sit down and watch a lot of stuff. If I do, usually I'm watching stuff about reenacting or history, because one thing that I would like everyone else to keep in mind is that while I do have free time, and a lot of people do want me to check out Ukraine's war stuff in my free time, I look at the Ukraine war about 60 hours a week, if not more. And so after a while, it gets very tiring to see the war, and I do fatigue of seeing people get blown away and killed in firefights and all that kind of stuff. And so when I'm not having to do this for the streams, I generally just try and spend my free time doing things I find fun, so that way when I sit down I have to watch some of this doom and gloom stuff, it doesn't get to me that bad because I'm literally I'm not literally like living in it. So with that, I unfortunately haven't been able to watch the guy. I will try to eventually, but I hope you understand that I try and pace myself with the Ukraine war in my free time, so that way I don't get burned out and start feeling down in the dumps and that kind of stuff. So with that, I thank you very much for the support. I hope you understand where I'm coming from, and I will try and eventually watch that. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the question, and we're going to be moving on to the next one.
All right, and up next we have an $8 donation from Farbod A, who says, Enforcer, is it true that the USA is selling 4 MQ-1C Gray Eagles to Ukraine to boost their drone arsenal?
I have not seen that, so I cannot confirm or deny, which is a very cliche thing to say, but I cannot do either of those because I haven't heard any news about that to say whether that's true or not. So I thank you very much for the support, but sadly, I can't really tell you if that's true because I haven't heard about it and I haven't seen anything about it. But with that, I thank you so much for the support. I will try and get some more information on that if possible, and if there is any news about it, I'll make sure to report on it. And so I thank you once again for bringing that to my attention. I will try and take a look at that. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have an $8 donation from Wojtek CYVR, who says, it looks like Russia is throwing everything they have into Severodonetsk/Lysychansk front. I see long trains full of tanks and rocket launchers. Can Ukrainians hang on until weapons arrive?
Yes, they can. We've seen them do this multiple times throughout the war. The situation's not going to change. The Russians are just throwing more meat into the grinder, and nothing's going to happen. Like every time there's kind of like a concern of the Russians actually getting the hand on Ukrainians, I highly doubt it. Whenever they do, it's incredibly small. Like, for example, we've seen them take one village today, and that's all the progress that they've made on the front lines is just one village. That's what's culminated into. So I just don't think that they're ever going to be able to manage to create enough of leverage against the Ukrainians to actually take any ground for the Ukrainians to even be concerned about holding it. But still, at the same time, it's very important that we try and send over as much support as fast as possible to ensure that the Ukrainians can get the upper hand over the Russians first, and then hopefully try and start pushing them back through successful counterattacks. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, and I thank you very much for the support. Also, to cover the last bit, just in case, because I think there was a question about this, Severodonetsk will hold. It's been holding so far. I do think Well, when I say Severodonetsk, I'm kind of talking about Severodonetsk and Lysychansk combined. They will hold. Lysychansk is nearly a fortress geographically compared to Severodonetsk, and so if the Ukrainians do get pushed into Lysychansk, they will be able to hold that much easier than they are Severodonetsk. So with that, I hope that does answer the question, and I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we are on to the next question.
All right, and we now have 10 super chats left before we can get to our mini live chat questions. So
How
up next,
many?
we have an 8 with 10.
Oh, okay.
So we now have an $8 donation from Martin Van Own, who does not leave a comment. So thank you very much for your support of the channel, Martin. We appreciate it very much. And now we have a $5 donation from Diffuse56, who says, what is your take on us not sending the counter battery radar with the M777s?
While it's unfortunate it is hindering the abilities of the M777s, one does always have to remember that those specific targeting systems are, I guess you could say, intertwined into the United States, I guess you could say internet database in a way. That's a very poor way of explaining it because I don't really know all too much about it myself, so it's very hard for me to describe the exact system and how it's used, but it is integrated kind of like in a data link system with the rest of the systems in the United States. And so if one of those things were captured by the Russians, it would be giving away vital national secrets to our national security that we might need if we were to go into a war with the Russians or another country. And so in that regard, we're kind of looking out for our own national security, but we're also trying to have our cake and eat it too by sending over the M777s and hoping that they do as good as possible in Ukraine. So I hope that does answer the question. While it's unfortunate that they can't be sent over, I understand why, and it's for national security. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, at least my thoughts on it. I think it's a justified reason. And I thank you very much for the support. Once again, Diffuse, you've been around forever, and you always support this channel, and I've got to thank you so much for it. And with that, we are on to the next question.
And moving on, we have a $5 donation from Shifting Signs, who says, as someone from a developing country, I still hope that the West will still defend the democracy, capitalism, and values that you guys gave the world.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. And of course, I do hope that we will try and uphold that in Ukraine as much as possible. Another interesting historical tidbit, speaking about capitalism, is capitalism was a very interesting system to me. I actually did not know the roots of capitalism, but apparently there was a group of Jewish people who lived in the Netherlands in this, I think it was like in the 15 or the 1600s, late 1500s, early 1600s, and they had no money, all right? So they had to figure out a way to finance their expeditions to be able to make a profit. And so what they did is that they came up with these things called shares, and they would allow people to buy these shares, which pretty much funded their operations at a set price. And for them buying their shares at a set price, if these expeditions ever made any money, these people would be entitled to a certain percentage of it. And thus, modern capitalism was born. I actually did not know that historical tidbit until I watched a channel a little while ago. It's a very good channel. I forgot the name of it. But I was watching it and I was like, no way. I was like, that's like, I didn't know how capitalism actually started until that point. I thought it just naturally started cropping up in Western Europe across multiple nations. But that's why the Dutch Empire was so wealthy and so successful in its early years, like in the 16 and 1700s, and why this tiny country was able to field one of the largest navies in the world and also had colonial holdings all over the world, is because they came up with practically a brand new economic system to fund that kind of growth, which was incredibly cool to me. And I think that's a huge credit to the Dutch, who came up with capitalism, which I didn't know. But I hope that does kind of give a little bit of a historical tidbit about capitalism, and I do agree that I hope that the West does uphold the capitalist and democratic systems that we hold dear to us as kind of like key tenets and, I guess you could say, principles of the Western world, and I hope that they do continue to try and help foster those inside of Ukraine. And so, with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And also, real quick, and I'm going to pull that up later. Y'all may have seen this channel. It's a British cartoon character, and he talks about all kinds of interesting stuff, like how Britain almost became a Muslim country in the 1200s, although there wasn't a lot of evidence to it, and how relics in the Catholic world worked in the medieval ages. Whole bunch of interesting stuff that this guy covers that's very obscure, and that was one of the few things, and it was kind of, that one was tied into why Portugal declined in power from being the Portuguese Empire, which controlled large swaths of South America, like Brazil, to being the country it is today, which is largely considered poor. So with that, I hope that does address where I heard that from and what context it was in, and it was really interesting to me to hear, and I thought it was a very cool tidbit of history. But with that, we're going to move on to the next question, and I thank you so much for the support.
All right, and moving on to the next one, we have a $5 donation from C.A. Lear, who says, with the start of Lend-Lease, shouldn't Ukraine start getting as much as they want of supplies within reason and limitations?
Could you reread that one to me real quick? Because I was actually looking at the live chat and I saw something interesting there. So one more time, please.
And C.A. Lear says, with the start of the Lend-Lease, shouldn't Ukraine start getting as much as they want of supplies?
Now, that's something that is a little bit confusing to me. I don't really know the answer to. It appears that the United States actually kind of orchestrates how fast the Lend-Lease works and what they get, because they were talking about the next package, and the Lend-Lease is going to consist of this, and the U.S. government has decided that this is what they're going to send. And I was like, I thought the Lend-Lease was them requesting equipment, and then we just sent it over. But apparently, it looks like, from what I can tell, it's what the U.S. is willing to send, and then they send it. And we're not trying to like race to fill an order or something like that. We're just sending them what we want. So that was kind of interesting to me. And I think that in that regard, to answer that question, the Ukrainians just kind of get what they get. And apparently the Americans just send over the U.S. Since I am an American, it's not like it's a third person thing. The U.S. sends over whatever they feel is appropriate for them. So it's not going to come over in like massive waves of however much the Ukrainians need. Apparently it's based off of what the U.S. government is willing to give them. So with that, I hope that does answer the question, at least in brief, and I do thank you very much once again for the support. And with that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And next up, let me recognize a $10 donation from May Osborne. Thank you very much for your support of the channel, and we appreciate it very much, as always. So, moving on to our next super chat, we have a $5 donation from H2O Barry Matt, who says, did you hear the foreign fighters from Mariupol got sentenced to death, 3 of them including 2 Brits?
Yes, I did. We actually covered that news earlier in the stream when we were covering the Donbass region. So I highly suggest you go back and check that out, because we actually had the video of them being sentenced to death. And it's very sickening to think about it, and hopefully they don't get put to death, and hopefully some kind of agreement can be reached where they'll be released. But with that, I thank you very much for the support and bringing that to our attention again, and I hope that does address the question. And with that being said, we're on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from Kimberly Burkaw. Hopefully I'm saying that properly. But anyways, Kimberly says, tell your parents that they did a great job. They should be very proud.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. Of course, it's always greatly appreciated, and I'm glad that you do think that I'm a well-put-together person who is pretty calm, level-headed, and well-collected. It's, of course, a high compliment, and I do thank you very much for giving me that compliment, and I'll make sure to spread the word to my parents that they did a very good job raising me. Apparently, a lot of people think that. I think I'm kind of normal, but I will take the compliments, and I will pass them on. And so thank you very much, Kimberly, for the support, and also the high praise. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And moving on, we have a $5 donation from Rick, my Rick, who says, why is the map always out of focus? Videos are good.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, but I don't know what you're talking about specifically with the video. As far as I know, this thing is in focus. Let me go hop over onto the stream on my other screen, and let me see if it's out of focus for me.
And moving on, we have
I'm looking at it over here. You may have heard Matthew's voice there just for a second while I muted it. And it doesn't look blurry to me. It's actually the same definition on my screen that it is with me looking at it. So I think that may be a problem on your end. You might want to check your graphics settings, because that may be the issue. But I do thank you very much for the support. And unfortunately, I can't tell you why that's happening to you in particular, because I just took a look at it and it looked fine to me. So with that, we're going to be moving on to the next question, but I do thank you very much for the support.
And next up, let me recognize a $5 donation from Xavier Estrada. Thank you very much for your support of the channel, and he does not leave a comment. And moving on, we have a $4 donation from AC0, who says, hello, Enforcer and Matt. Here, some bit for coffee. Enforcer, can I use your logo on my scope cover?
Yeah, I mean, like, sure. I mean, like, there's no problem with that. That would be pretty neat. And also, I thank you very much for the support. Of course, it does help out the channel a lot, and I hope that you do have fun putting the logo on the scope cover. And so with that, I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does address the question. And with that being said, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $4 donation from Some Ting Wong, who says, for updated Russian losses, the Ukraine World Facebook page posts a great daily infographic. Thanks for the great streams.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I don't know a lot about that YouTube channel, but of course, there's a lot of interesting news sources out there that are covering this war, and of course, you know, I'm always trying to toot my own horn on this channel because I always want people to watch mine. But there are other good sources out there, and I highly recommend that everyone goes and checks out multiple different sources because sometimes they may have information that I don't. So with that, I thank you very much for the support and also the recommendation there. And with that being said, or with that in mind, I'm trying to change it up a little bit. Although I saw someone go, with that being said, and with that being said, I'm out. And I was like, whatever. But anyways, I thank you very much for the support. And with that being said, we're on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $4 donation from Jonathan Toe, who says, Enforcer, if United States were to militarily intervene in Nicaragua, I can't say that right to save my life, it could add credence to Russia's invasion and lose the moral high ground. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, like, the thing is that, yeah, I mean, like, that's a tough one to answer because I do see where you're coming from there, but at the same time, the United States does have to ensure that its interests are secured, and, you know, to do that, we, of course, have to have a little bit of elbow grease going around and doing these sorts of things. And so, with the Russians, of course, strong-arming the Ukrainians where they couldn't join NATO on their own volition, or the European Union for that matter, and then allowing them to come over to Nicaragua and station soldiers inside of the country, that's pretty much allowing them to do whatever they want, and there's really no repercussions because we haven't directly intervened in the Ukraine war. We have not sent forces over there to support the Ukrainians. And then on top of that, we'd be allowing Russian soldiers inside of Nicaragua to just be based there, and then we wouldn't be doing anything about that either. And so I feel like military intervention in Nicaragua, while when you really look at it on the surface, it would almost be similar to what the Russians have done in Ukraine, because, you know, they were scared that American forces, well, the U.S. would be right on the Russian border in Ukraine. We would be scared about the Russians being in Nicaragua here in Central America, and we would pretty much be going into Nicaragua with the same ideas and principles that Russia went to Ukraine with. But we wouldn't be denazifying the country, we would just be kicking the Russians out of Central America. So in that aim, it is a little bit different. But still, I don't think we'd be losing the moral high ground because one does have to remember that the Russians are trying to secure their own interests. And I do have to say that in the regards of this war starting to ensure their strategic, I guess you could say, advantage, or at least some kind of a stopgap, in that regard, the war did make sense. Because if you're playing the board game, they're of course trying to make sure that the Western forces, specifically the United States, is not within striking distance of Volgograd if a conventional war was to break out immediately. So in that regard, it does make sense. And so if the United States had to do that in Nicaragua, I don't really see any moral ground being lost. It's just all part of the massive game that every country on the earth is playing, which is trying to assure its, I guess you could say, sphere of influence is reigning over the others. And so I think that would pretty much just be falling into that line of interests. You know, so with that, I hope that kind of does answer the question, and we're going to be moving on to the next one. And I do thank you very much for the support.
And next up, we have a $4 donation from Yuri Bench again, and thank you for your continued support. And unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to read the first part of that super chat just to avoid upsetting anybody in the chat. But they say, the sort of modified version, I get up every morning in Israel at 5:30 a.m. to watch your excellent channel live.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and it's really cool that we have viewers in Israel. That's something that I haven't heard before. I haven't heard of a lot of people from the stream being from Israel, so that's really interesting to hear. I'm assuming that you most likely live near Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Netanya, Haifa, or Beersheba, considering that those are all the only major cities, it seems, in Israel. It's a very small country, but it's still really cool. that this country is so small. I mean, like, how wide is it right here? Let me check that with a ruler. 9 miles. Jeez, that's like nothing. Of course, that's saying that they don't control Palestine, which we're not getting into that. Golly, no, we're not covering that at all. But still, it's very interesting to hear that you are watching it from Israel. I haven't heard that before, and it is really cool to know that there's people all around the world who are watching this and even getting up at very early times of the day to watch it. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. It's cool to hear that we do have viewers in Israel, of all places in the world. And, of course, there's a lot of people from all over, like Norway, Britain, France, Germany. We even have a few Russians. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the comment in a way, and it is cool to hear that we do have viewers in Israel. And so with that, I'm going to be moving on to the next question, but I do thank you for the support.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from Louise Salmaron, who says, thanks for keeping us informed on the Russian war against their neighbor, Ukraine.
And I thank you very much for enjoying the content and helping us to continue on and make this kind of stuff. Because without support from the viewers like you, it's not possible. And so thank you once again for pretty much holding the weight of this channel on y'all's shoulders and ensuring we can keep on doing it. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $2 donation from C.A. Lags, who says, still trying to raise funds for United 24, ?
We are trying to do that, but the problem is that the EIN number that I was given apparently didn't work on GuideStar. It was apparently for some house something of Ukraine, and when I tried to put that into the YouTube system, it didn't actually work. And so sadly, I wasn't able to do that for United 24, but we do have the affiliate programs that United 24 is associated with, like Razom for Ukraine, and also, I believe, Revive Soldiers of Ukraine is another one of those organizations. So I hope that does address the question. We try and get funds as close as possible to United 24, and that's about as close as we can get on the YouTube platform. So with that, I hope that does answer the question, and I thank you very much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $2 donation from Mr. Lunchtime, who says, for a slice of pizza on me, great work, guys.
Hey, well, I thank you very much, Mr. Lunchtime, and we will get a slice of pizza courtesy of Mr. Lunchy. So with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does address the comment, Mr. Lunchtime. And with that, we are on to the next question.
And the last super chat of the night goes to Aiden Reuter, who says, what if Russia called it here and keep ground it has?
If Russia called it here and kept the ground it had, it would become the Ukrainians' responsibility to commit an offensive war and then push them out of the country. Right now, the Russians are still trying to commit an offensive, and the Ukrainians are on the defensive by and large. But in that event, it would be like World War I, where the Germans plant themselves firmly into the ground and start fighting a defensive war from then on. So then the Ukrainians would have the responsibility of pushing them back out of the country if they want the land back. So with that in mind, I hope that does answer the question, at least how it would turn out in general, the broad picture of it. And I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And we are now moving on to our live chat questions. But before we get to our first one, let me give a shout out to Merwin for putting in a $2 donation. Thank you very much for that. And thank you for supporting the channel. So for our first live chat question, we have one from Duncan VR, who says, can Enforcer give us some insight into the state of a future Russian Space Force? Out-of-date spacecraft with washing machines, all filled with rubbish.
Well, I thought that was a serious question for a second. I was about to answer it almost just like that, but then you kind of answered it for me. A Russian Space Force would be incredibly archaic, to say the least. They would most like you know, it's just like transportation around orbit. They would be using Soyuz craft, which have been used since the 70s and the 60s. And I mean, like, anything coming from the Russians is honestly a joke. They don't have the economy to back up any of this stuff. And so I hope that it does answer the question in brief. And the answer is the Russian Space Force would practically be non-existent. They would really rely a lot on Western companies to make sure that they could survive. So it'd be a very, very weak force in their military if it was to become a separate branch. I do believe that the Russian Air Force is actually called the Russian Air and Space Force, kind of like the French Air Force is called. Russian Air and Space Force. The Russian Aerospace Forces, which includes the Russian Space Forces. And you can see that right there. They actually have a very similar emblem to the U.S. Space Force. Let me pull that up. I remember when the U.S. Space Force flag came out, everyone was dogging on it, saying it looked a lot like Star Trek, and it kind of does. It has almost the same design on it. Hopefully I don't get copyrighted for this, but the Star Trek emblem. And here's the Star Trek emblem for the United Federation of Planets, because I have watched Star Trek before. Mostly older ones, not new ones. But you can see that it's almost identical. I mean, like, everything about it's very similar. I can't dog on it, though. It was a neat design. But still, you would think that they wouldn't have copied it that much. Also, the ranks look pretty cool. You can see one being displayed right there. But with that, I hope that does address the question, at least in a way. And you can also see that the Russian Space Forces has a similar design to theirs as well. But the questionability of whether this thing is actually functional or not is a whole other question, because I just don't think it is. I mean, like, they hardly have a budget for the military in the first place, and we already know that NASA, let's pull up NASA's budget. NASA budget for 2021. 23 billion. So NASA's budget, doing this very small amount that they already do, is nearly half of Russia's annual military budget. So that gives you a perspective of how little their Space Force is probably doing. It's almost nothing. So with that, I hope that does answer the question, and I do thank you very much for the support. And with that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from Hoodoo, Texas, who says, how about the Russian economy? Can the war be won militarily, or will it require the success of sanctions?
I believe that the war is going to rely on both successes militarily and also sanctions. There's never just a one-way approach to things. You want to try and leverage everything as possible. And so pairing both the economic sanctions along with, successful military exploits in Ukraine, the war will come to an end. You can't lift the sanctions and then hope on military successes alone, because then that'll allow the Russians a little bit more extra leeway on the front lines where they may have military successes. And you can't count on sanctions alone, because then, the Russians could still be led to military successes on the field. So it's kind of a combination of the two that'll lead the Ukrainians to victory. And so with that, we're on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from Linda Vickers, who says, if Russia kills the British POWs, would NATO respond?
I don't think they will, because NATO might say, and this is a fair argument, they knew the risks, the potential risks of going and joining the Ukrainian military, and that was just part of the inherent risks. That's something that a government may say, and of course they'll say it with teary eyes and all that stuff, but they're probably not going to get embroiled in World War III over those guys, sadly. I think it honestly, at this point, we should have gotten involved at some point earlier on. But then again, nuclear weapons are involved, which complicates matters a whole load of actually getting involved or not. So with that, I hope that does answer the question, and we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from Original Name, who says, do you think the USA and Britain could do much with special operations teams to directly engage Russian forces off the books, or would that be quote-unquote bad?
That would be quote-unquote bad. There's really no way to engage Russian forces with our special forces off the books, because they would have to be transported somewhere. So, of course, they have to be transported in some kind of American aircraft, or they would have to get into Russia, traveling around with a whole bunch of tactical gear with them somewhere, and if they ever got pulled over and searched, the whole entire gig is up. Everyone's going to know what was going on. It's going to be a massive embarrassment. It's going to give away what we were planning on doing. And so I don't think that would be a good thing to do. A lot of people have high hopes that the special forces can just go wherever and do whatever and not really be caught. But the truth is that special forces, actually, from as far as we know, and as far as I historically know, actually have a really high casualty rate. And a lot of their missions actually end in failure, but those are usually classified. Because that's, obviously we're not wanting to say how many times a whole entire team of SEALs gets wiped out, or Green Berets, so those largely go under the table, but while the successes are, of course, lauded upon. But at the same time, just because I'm saying that the Special Forces aren't met with success to a high percentage, that isn't to say that their missions aren't incredibly important. A lot of their missions are vitally important, but it's the matter of throwing enough, I guess you could say, crap at the wall until it sticks for them to eventually have a successful mission that does something. Because there's actually been multiple times that I've at least seen that's been documented through history where special forces just got the short end of the stick and they got floored. And then there's a lot of times where they didn't get floored and they did an incredibly good job and changed the whole entire course of a war. So with that, I hope that does address the question, and we're going to be moving on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from Cole D, who says, Enforcer, do you think that Ukraine could possibly be doing this to bleed Russia of their resources and vehicles and then invade after they've dealt a sufficient amount of damage?
I don't think they'd ever invade, no matter how much damage they cause to the Russians, because, of course, they're a nuclear country, and if they do invade, the Russians could just start flinging nukes at everyone in panic. So, with that, I hope that answers the question, at least in brief, because that's really just the be-all, end-all to it. And so with that, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have a question from Beef Taco, who says, do you think the Wagner Group and Kadyrov compete against each other? Yeah, there you go. Compete against each other for Putin's love.
I really think the Kadyrovites, sorry, I don't want to call them Chechens because there's Chechens in Ukraine that don't deserve to be put in the same group as those guys. But the Kadyrovites, I think they're really going more for the praise of Don. I think they're going for him more so than Putin. I think the Spetsnaz and the VDV and all those guys, of course, they're like, we love Putin. But the Kadyrovites, they're really more for trying to appease Don, So I hope that answers the question, at least in brief. In my assumptions on it, of course, I may be wrong. Obviously, I don't know how internal Russian politics, especially military politics, is working for them. And so with that, we're moving on to the next question. Hello? Hello?
Can you hear me, Enforcer?
Yes, I can.
Okay, it appears we're having some... hello?
Hello?
Can you hear me now, Enforcer?
Yes, I can.
Okay, yeah. Hopefully our internet's not about to go out because it looks like we're having splotchy connection here. But anyways.
Hello? All right, let me go see what's going on here. Looks like the voice connection's good. So can you hear me, Matthew? Testing. Can I hear you? Can you hear me? Just trying to see real quick. Oh boy. Oh man, the stream might have gone down. Man, just as an aside to y'all, just in case Matthew can't hear me, it is incredibly annoying for me for the streams to go down because I have to go, if they go all the way down, and restart the whole entire thing and do it within minutes, and it takes a lot of work to do that. And so,
hello?
All right, so it looks like Matthew's back. Now that that aside's over, it looks like some of y'all can hear. And so hopefully Matthew can hear me, and we're going to answer 2 more questions from the chat, and then we're going to round it out for the night. It appears our internet's also having some problems, so right now is a good time to start cutting things off. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and did you get my question from Tommy Gordon?
I did not.
Okay, so we're going to go to that question now. So the question from Tommy Gordon was, Enforcer, I wish I had money to contribute, but hope you could answer honestly. Is the Donbass region a lost cause and will go the same course as the Crimean Peninsula?
Well, thank you very much for the support. Well, not really. I thank you very much for the wish of sending us support. It's of course a kind gesture, and of course you don't always have to support the channel to get a question answered. So I will answer this honestly. Donbass is not a lost cause because Ukraine controls a very small percentage of it now. This is all they control right here where my mouse cursor is circling. On the other hand, they still control half of Donetsk. And of course, Luhansk and Donbass combined make up the entire, well, Luhansk and Donetsk combined make up the entirety of the Donbass. And so in that regard, I don't think it's a lost cause because they do lose all of Luhansk. They still have half of Donetsk to fight over. So in that instance, and considering how slow Russian offensives are moving and how little ground they actually take, I think the Ukrainians are in a really good position to continue holding on to the rest of the Donbass for a very long while. And so with that, I see that we're having some connectivity issues again. I hope Matthew can hear me, but I hope that does address the question, and we're going to move on to the last one. If Matthew can hear me, we're going to answer that, and then we're going to let the internet connectivity issues just ride and end the stream.
Okay, and I think you're lagging a little bit behind there, Enforcer, if you can still hear me. It sounds like you're like sort of in a voice changer. But if you can still hear me, the next question is from Jungle Jim AB9AB, who says, Enforcer Ukraine Intelligence Directorate, GUR, reported June 9th that Russian forces are mining Kherson with mines from the 1950s. How effective can they be?
A mine of any kind is going to be pretty effective. Of course, it's just an explosive in the ground. I don't know if they're anti-tank mines. They may be anti-personnel mines. And so in that case, they would probably just be effective regardless of how old they are. And that may be why they're using them in such large numbers. Once a mine is made, a mine is dangerous. There are still mines, just in case y'all don't know. There's actually zones in France. We can pull them up here. For example, French red zones. And here it is. This is the map of zones in France. And a lot of y'all may be seeing, Verdun, Cambrai, Lille, San Quentin. All of these are names from World War I. Amiens, Soissons. All of these are names from World War I. What is this map, and why does it look like this? This is actually red zones left over from World War I. There are mines and unexploded ordnance all in these massive red zones, and it's so dangerous for people to still go in there, even though these munitions are 100 years old at this point, that they're red zones and people are not allowed to go in them because they could get killed really easily. There are, of course, yellow and green zones, which people are allowed to wander around. But I believe in the yellow zones, people are told to stay on the trails that have been made, because if you veer off of them, you may step on something explosive and get killed. The green zones, I think, are relatively safe. And you can see, and you know, moving from that point, you can see how large this zone is, because Paris is on the map. And if we pull that up, Paris... Let's go to Google Maps here real quick and take a look at this. A little bit of a history lesson for y'all about World War I and its overarching consequences. But we can see that the furthest back city on here is Soissons. So let's find Soissons, which is up here. And you can see, when we zoom out, how far that is into France. It's from Soissons to Paris. Let me get out my marker, mold my ruler. Let's go over here. Soissons to Paris is only 40 miles to the suburbs. And so that gives you an idea of how big this area is. It pretty much spans the entirety of most of the front lines in World War I. And it gives you a really good idea of how dangerous munitions can be, no matter how old they are, and if they are active or if they were just unintentionally left there, to the point that the French actually have highlighted red zones where the front lines in World War I used to be, where it's so dangerous. In fact, these areas have been touched so little by people that you could still see some of the trench works that were left there 100 years ago. Of course, they aren't in the same condition they were when they were made, but you can still see the general shapes of these trench works, which tells you how dangerous this place is that no one's even dared touch them. So with that, I hope that kind of answers that question about how effective the mines can be, considering that the red zones still exist in France almost 110 years after the First World War ended. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. Well, not really the support. There was no support there, but I thank you very much for the question. It was a great one, and it allowed me to go into a lot of what I know about World War I and kind of bring that into the modern day. And with that, we have reached the end of tonight's stream. I thank you all so much for watching. I'm sorry that we have had some internet issues here near the end. Of course, it's always troublesome to me. Hopefully it wasn't too troublesome to y'all, but I have enjoyed telling y'all tonight's news once again. I hope y'all have enjoyed as well, and I will see you all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 24 hours of the War of Ukraine on day 107, and that will be getting us one day closer to our Sunday night fundraiser, where we'll be once again setting the goal quite high and hoping for the stars. So I thank you all once again, and I hope you all have an outstanding night. And also, Slava Ukraini, Heroям Slava, and also, long live the Lee Spring Army. You have a great night, and take care.
More Oh,